Knowing that it would be best for him to distance himself as far from Alice as possible, Carlton harumphed coldly, "Given your gold digger personality and your subpar looks, do you really think that you're able to move my heart? If not for the fact that there's a treasure beneath your house, there's no way that they would have put up with you till now." "Enough," Seth said with a fling of his sleeve. Struck in the chest, Carlton was sent flying before crashing heavily back onto the ground. His face reddened and a mouthful of crimson blood spurted from his lips. "You only have to tell me what I want to know," Seth said coldly. "Everything other than that is just a waste of my time." Yes. Suppressing his injuries, Carlton heaved a sigh of relief upon knowing that he had managed to make it clear that he didn't have any relationship with Alice at all anymore. "I really don't know anything about the treasure and the like, but over the past year of work, I have gotten near my goal. However, it is just that the barrier around the treasure is too strong, such that even I'm unable to breach it due to my lacking cultivation." Seth pondered with a deep frown for a moment before replying, "Take me there." For someone of the Blanchard Sage clan to go through so much effort just to acquire some treasure, it was likely that the treasure was truly nothing ordinary. Since that was the case, he really should head over to take a look. "All right," Carlton nodded. Given that his life was in the other party's hands, there was no way that he could turn the other party down. Thus, Seth released his pressure on Carlton, and under the latter's lead, they entered the manor. As for Alice, she stood hesitantly on the spot for a moment before choosing to follow them. As soon as Seth and Gia entered the manor, the first thing they noticed were innumerable isolation formations set up all around. It was really no exaggeration to say that the manor was an enclosed fortress by itself, such that nothing inside could get out. Proceeding ahead, it didn't take long for them to stop before a majestic hall. Pushing the doors open, they saw a massive pit lying right ahead of them. There was a huge pile of white bones all around, forming a sight of desolation. "You killed so many people just to acquire a treasure?" Seth narrowed his eyes as killing intent seeped out of his body. The responsibility of the Combat Master Hall lay not only in fending off the otherworldly demonic tribe, but in maintaining the peace and prosperity of mankind as well. To kill so many humans just to acquire a treasure was already an infringement of the Combat Master Hall's moral code. No, Ned, I didn't kill them. They were workers whom I spent a fortune to hire. They were in charge of the excavation job. But not too long ago, when they dug up a stone tablet, an armor was released, and all of them died on the spot. For fear that it would draw suspicion, I reduced their corpses to white bones and left them here," Carlton explained in a fluster. "I have already compensated the families of the workers handsomely. Even though I desire treasure a lot, I dare not kill the innocent for the sake of it." Stone tablet? Knowing that these workers were already dead, and that it would be difficult to continue investigating this matter, Seth decided to put that matter aside for the time being and inquire about the other suspicion that he had. "It is located at the bottom of the pit. I dispatched 10 death soldiers to inspect it, but all of them died as soon as they reached the vicinity of the stone tablet. So I'm not too sure about what's going on either," Carlton explained with a bitter look on his face. He had thought that he had stumbled upon a huge treasure, but who could have known that the death toll would just keep rising higher and higher? He had already sunk in too much to allow himself to back off with nothing in hand. As there was no one else who was willing to approach the stone tablet, Carlton had no choice but to turn to Emperor Joffrey in hopes of acquiring some more death soldiers from him. It was just that he had never expected to stumble upon these two experts shortly after leaving his manor. Let's head down and take a look, Hearing that a stone tablet had actually taken away so many lives, Seth was growing more and more intrigued.
I am a little too weak for this, so I'll leave the two of you to be.
Carlton's face paled. It went without saying that he didn't dare enter the pit himself. He was afraid that he would die just like the many others that had gone before him.
Oh, cut the crap and get moving,
Gia harumphed. With a wave of her hand, Carlton was thrown into the pit before he could release a scream of agony, following which Seth and Gia leaped in. The pit was roughly several 100 feet deep. There were many night illumination pearls placed all around, making the interior shine as though it was morning. As soon as they reached the bottom of the pit, Seth and Gia immediately began looking around, only to have frowns creep onto their faces shortly after.
This aura feels a little weird,
Seth said after a moment of careful examination.
It is the aura of an ancient sage,
Gia said. She turned to Carlton beside her and asked,
Where's this stone tablet supposed to be?
It is supposed to be down there.
Gulping from fright, Carlton pointed in front of him. Knowing that there was something sinister about this place, Seth took a deep breath and whipped out his spear. He flicked his wrist lightly, and a large pile of sand was raked up, revealing a massive stone tablet. There were mysterious, unreadable inscriptions on the stone tablet, and it emanated an air of killing intent. Just looking at the stone tablet was enough to leave one with a splitting headache. The aura of an ancient sage that the two of them had felt earlier originated from that very stone tablet.
This is the stone tablet that I talked about. Masters, I am a little too weak for this, so I will be taking my leave now.
With quivering lips, Carlton immediately turned around and darted away fearfully. However, barely after taking 2 steps, his body suddenly froze on the spot. No matter how much he struggled, he found himself unable to go a single step further.
Oh, with us around, there's no way that you will lose your life. Or if we die, there will be no one to treat your poison. And you'll die,
Gia remarked calmly. Carlton was really on the verge of bursting into tears. The other party was right. He was afflicted with severe poison, so if these two died, he would be the next to follow no matter where he fled. I'll head over to take a look. Taking a deep breath, Seth placed his spear in front of him before approaching the stone tablet with wary, controlled steps. Before even reaching the stone tablet, he suddenly felt concentrated killing intent gushing in his direction, seemingly attempting to tear him in two. In the face of such might, any great sage cultivator would have succumbed to the immense pressure by now. However, Seth was an ancient sage cultivator, as well as the head of the Combat Master Hall. He had tempered his mind before, making him exceptionally resilient to the otherworldly demon's gleam of slaughter. No matter how concentrated the killing intent was, it wouldn't pose a threat to him. Walking up to the stone tablet, he noticed that it was also emanating a warm glow. As if the tens of thousands of years that it had likely spent buried underground hadn't damaged it in the slightest, its inscriptions looked as if they were freshly carved. Tracing the inscriptions with his fingers, Seth shook his head. These are words from the ancient era. I can't read them at all. Due to the limitations of his knowledge, he couldn't discern the content of the inscriptions. If their teacher was with them, they might still have been able to do something about that. Seeing that Seth actually dared to touch the stone tablet, Carlton's teeth clattered together in fright. All of the workers and soldiers that he had sent in had passed away even when they were standing a long distance away from the stone tablet. Yet this young man was able to walk up to it and even touch it directly with his hands? Just how powerful was he? Why would such a formidable figure suddenly come to a place as minor as the Olmec Kingdom? All of a sudden, Carlton's body froze on the spot as 2 names surfaced in his mind.
Wait a bit. He recognizes Alice. He uses a spear, and his junior is a Mr. Practitioner of Poison. Could they possibly be?
Even though he hadn't been in his clan over the past few years, there was probably no one in the world who didn't know of the deeds of that legendary man and his many disciples. Thinking about it, most of them seemed to have their roots in Olmec Kingdom. Could the young man before him possibly be the most talented individual the Combat Master Hall had ever had, Hallmaster Klein? He knew that the new Hallmaster of the Combat Master Hall went by the surname of Klein, but he hadn't been too sure of the other party's full name. However, now that he was raking his mind, he seemed to have the impression that the other party's full name was Seth Klein. An ordinary woman like Alice actually had the fancy of the incumbent head of the Combat Master Hall? Sweat covered Carlton's head as he felt a hoarseness at the back of his throat. He felt as if he would pass out at any moment. Ignoring Carlton, who was facing the most severe mental breakdown of his entire life, the frown on Seth's forehead grew deeper and deeper as he walked around the stone tablet to take a closer look. Then he turned back to look at Gia. Gia nodded in response, as if affirming Seth's judgment. So, Seth took a deep breath before taking several steps back, following which his spear shot forth with formidable might. Spatial ripples appeared in the air as the spear struck the direct center of the stone tablet. The sound of the formation being torn apart echoed as the entire stone tablet trembled. A huge crack appeared in the ground, forming a passageway that led further downward. The smell of decay was absent in the passageway. However, there was the scent of something ancient and sinister as well, almost like a pathway leading to the netherworld. Let's head in to take a look. The brave Seth was the first one to step into the passageway, and Gia followed behind him. The passageway was dark and slightly damp. The inscriptions on the wall had sealed the passageway tightly, such that those whose cultivation hadn't reached ancient sage would never be able to even sense its existence.
This seems to be a pathway constructed during Heath Cole's era,
Gia said as she inspected her surroundings carefully. In truth, the passageway looked as good as new, but the construction method and the inscriptions carried clear indications of the ancient era, thus hinting at its age. Heading down the passageway, they traveled for several dozen miles over the course of an hour before finally arriving before Stone Chamber. Seth placed his spear before his chest in preparation to meet with any unexpected circumstances. At the same time, Gia flicked her wrist and embedded several night illumination pearls into the walls all around, bringing illumination to the area. The stone chamber was roughly 120 feet in diameter, and at the center was a coffin made out of bluestone. It emanated an extremely historic aura.
There's only a coffin in here.
Gia frowned in astonishment. Which fool would construct an underground passageway that extended several dozen miles and seal it with a stone tablet that only ancient sages could breach, just to store a single coffin? It was extremely extravagant, was it not? Perplexed, Seth slowly approached the coffin. Lifting his spear, he was just about to use it to pry open the coffin when a sharp aura suddenly emanated from it, following which he suddenly felt a jolt in his hands. Seth's spear fell right to the ground, as if paying respects to the coffin. What happened? Noticing that something was amiss, Gia swiftly gathered her poison aura as she rushed forward, ready to reinforce Seth at any moment. My spear has been intercepted by another spear intent. Seems like the person in the coffin comprehended a higher level of spear intent than me, Seth replied in astonishment. Even though his spear wasn't an ancient sage artifact, through prolonged contact with him, it wouldn't pale too much in comparison to one. Despite that, it still was forced to bow in submission to the coffin. It was apparent that whatever was in the coffin commanded a higher level of spear intent than him, rendering his spear utterly powerless before it.
Wait a moment, are you telling me that the thing in the coffin possesses spearmanship more advanced than yours?
Gia could hardly believe what she was hearing. Her senior had learned his spearmanship directly from their teacher, and he had already reached the level of spear quintessence. It was no joke to say that he was the second most formidable spear user in their era. Despite that, he was actually saying that the thing inside the coffin was more formidable than him. How could that be? No matter what, we have to open it to take a look. Junior, I need you to coordinate together with me in order to forcefully pry open the coffin, Seth said. Gia nodded in agreement. So, the two of them took their positions on the two ends of the coffin. With an understanding glance, Seth and Gia raised their hands simultaneously and grabbed forth. They were both ancient sage experts who had received Xavier's personal guidance over the course of a month, causing their fighting prowess to rise to an exceptional level. Even blood reincarnation realm experts would be pushed to a corner against their combined might, let alone a mere coffin. A hideous, screeching sound echoed in the air as a crack appeared on the coffin. An overwhelming aura surged into the ceiling, threatening to collapse the entire underground cavern on them. Seth quickly sealed the aura with a wave of his hand, and only after ensuring that it wasn't leaking at all did he finally proceed forward, slowly. The aura of ancient sages was destructive in nature. Even if a sliver of it leaked out, it could cause a huge calamity. Of course, cultivators of their caliber could deal with it easily. But the same could not be said for the civilians of Olmec Royal City. Their carelessness could easily spell countless deaths. Walking up to the coffin, they peeked inward, only to see a corpse lying still within. Even though years had passed, the corpse had still retained its flesh and blood. From its external appearance, it looked as if it was just a person sleeping. It's the corpse of an ancient sage! The eyebrows of the two of them shot up. Only the corpse of an ancient sage could possibly retain such frightening might even after death. Only the corpse of an ancient sage was imperishable, allowing it to retain its external appearance even after tens of thousands of years. This is... Taking a closer look at the corpse, Seth suddenly thought of something that caused his face to pale and his body stiffened up in shock. What's wrong? Gia asked. Even though they didn't interact with one another frequently, she did have a good grasp of Seth's personality. This senior of hers had a daring and reckless personality. So, it was perplexing to see him getting shaken by a mere corpse. He's ancient sage Merrill, Seth exclaimed as he clenched his fists tightly. The ancient sage Merrill? Was the disciple of Keith Cole who boasted the greatest fighting prowess, the founder of the Combat Master Hall? Gia was taken aback. That's right. Seth took in a deep breath to calm down the chaos in his mind. Ancient Sage Merrill had been one of the 10 apostles under Keith Cole's tutelage, and he had been the strongest ancient sage aside from Keith Cole himself. Just the fact that he was the founder of the Combat Master Hall was a testimony to his tremendous strength. On 2 different occasions, when he inherited the position of the Progeny of Combat and Hallmaster, he had knelt before Ancient Sage Merrill's sculpture, which looked identical to the corpse before him. This was also why he had identified the other party with a single glance. To think that one of the greatest disciples of Keith Cole, the second strongest ancient sage in the world, would actually have his corpse buried there. This was something that could not be found in any records. It was no wonder his spear had bowed down as soon as it met with the coffin. Ancient Sage Merrill was the spearmaster, and the Dragonbone Divine Spear was something that he had forged on his own. The fact that the other party had forged such a powerful artifact showed how deep his understanding of spearmanship truly was. It was little wonder that the other party's comprehension of spearmanship had even exceeded his own. After recovering from his shock, Seth turned around and instructed, Junior, I need you to quickly return and inform our teacher of this matter. Meanwhile, I'll stand guard here. The scale of this issue went beyond their initial expectations. Given the severity of the matter, it was best for them to bring their teacher in to help make a judgment call. Understanding the logic behind Seth's decision, Gia immediately turned around and flitted back to the surface. After Gia's departure, Seth walked slowly around the coffin, then stood before it, wanting to take a closer look at the elder who had founded the Combat Master Hall. But all of a sudden, a series of mechanical clicking noises echoed in the air, and yet another passageway surfaced beneath the coffin. Seth hesitated for a moment upon seeing this sight, before deciding to venture in. As soon as he stepped into the passageway, the ray of light above him vanished. The passageway had instantaneously closed on him. Faced with such a situation, Seth frowned in bewilderment, but he did not panic. He took out a night illumination pearl before carefully heading deeper into the passageway. A few steps later, he found another massive hall appearing before him. Its layout was very similar to the hall before, and there was another coffin positioned at the very center of this room. Seth pondered for a moment before walking toward that coffin. He raised his hand and pried open the lid, thus revealing a figure before him. When he got a closer look at that corpse, it was as if a mini explosion had occurred in his mind. He hurriedly retreated several steps till his back was pressed against the wall, yet even so, the disbelief in his mind didn't vanish at all. It was a very long while before a hoarse voice finally came out of his throat. "Keith Cole?" The corpse lying in the coffin was none other than the world's teacher, Keith Cole. Had he not ascended to a higher dimension? Why was his corpse there? Seth's mind blanked out in that instant. No thoughts came to his mind at all, and he didn't dare think any deeper into the matter. This was so huge that if he spoke the wrong words, it could lead to a major catastrophe. Keith Cole was the pillar of support within the Master Teacher Pavilion. Even though he had vanished from the world, many still held his teachings dear to them and viewed him as their ultimate aspiration. No one could have ever thought that the great Keith Cole would actually be dead there. Just like the sculptures erected in his form outside, he had a gentle smile on his face, reminiscent of a kind teacher. It was as if he had been killed in the midst of his lecture. But given the strength that Keith Cole wielded, who could possibly have the ability to kill him? And who was the one who had buried him there, such that even the Master Teacher Pavilion and the 100 Schools of Philosophers were completely oblivious to it? Seth's heart beat wildly as he felt his throat turning dry. There were so many words at the back of his mind, but he was unable to voice a single one of them. Eventually, he chose to simply sit on the floor and wait for himself to calm down. It had been a feeling of shock when he saw Ancient Sage Meryl's corpse, and after finding the second corpse, there was nothing but horror in his mind. It was perfectly normal for anyone in the world to die. But for such a thing to happen to the revered Keith Cole as well, the faith of countless would shatter in an instant. Seth was so flustered that he didn't know what he should do at all. It's fine. Everything will be resolved once teacher is here." Seth struggled to his feet as he shook whatever thoughts he had out of his mind. Having followed his teacher for so long, he knew that there was no difficulty in the world that could bring his teacher down. It was fine that he couldn't find a solution out of the current quandary he was seeing. All he had to do was wait. With such a thought, he began to leave the hall, intending to return to where he had come from. However, his feet suddenly froze in place. A surge of power washed over him, and his consciousness blurred. Silence. Sitting in the room that he had previously lectured in, Xavier felt his state of mind flowing freely, extending into the distance along with his thoughts. He had only been an ordinary librarian in his previous life. It was beyond his imagination that the day would come when he would transcend over to another world. It had been a period of confusion and panic when he first transcended over. He had no idea what he should do, and the only desire that drove him forward was the wish to live on. It had taken some time for everything to settle down and for him to assimilate into this world. All of the memories of his life surged into his head, be it his previous life, the period after his transcension, the moment that he first stepped into the Library of Heaven's path, and slowly, something seemed to sprout within Xavier. It was a strength that seemed to exceed even the heavens themselves. It was going to break free of the ground and blossom into something beautiful. In his moment of enlightenment, flurried footsteps sounded in his ears. He slowly opened his eyes, only to see Gia standing before him. Hearing Gia's words, Xavier abruptly rose to his feet. "Did you say that you found Ancient Sage Meryl's corpse?" Ancient Sage Meryl was the strongest out of Keith Cole's many disciples, and he'd been a figure whom innumerable combat masters looked up to. Why would his corpse be found there? Not to mention that it was even hidden in an underground hall several dozen miles deep. "Bring me over to take a look." Unable to bear his curiosity, he hurriedly followed Gia into Carlton's manor and into the underground passageway. Ignoring the still frozen Carlton, it wasn't long before they arrived in the first hall, with a coffin right at the center. Upon taking a closer look, a tight frown formed between Xavier's eyebrows. Judging from the appearance in the aura, he does seem to be Ancient Sage Meryl. Back when he was at the White Creek Mountain, he had the opportunity to meet Ancient Sage Meryl's fragmented soul. The corpse that was right before him shared the same appearance, and even the auras that they emanated were very similar. The corpse likely belonged to Ancient Sage Meryl. "You should come out and take a look as well," Xavier said with a flick of his wrist. The dragonbone divine spear flew forth from Xavier's waist and transformed into a majestic black dragon in the air. Looking down at the coffin beneath it, it descended to the ground and kneeled down.
Last tongue.
The body of the massive dragon trembled intensely as slight whimpers escaped from its mouth. It was an artifact forged by Ancient Sage Meryl. All along, it had thought that he had descended to a higher dimension together with Keith Cole after sealing it in the ancient domain at White Creek Mountain. But who could have known that he would die just like that? It seems like he's real then, Xavier remarked. He looked around the hall, and a slight frown appeared on his forehead. He turned to Gia and asked, "Where is Seth?"
I'm not too sure. He should be here."
Gia was taken aback. Given that Seth had asked her to get their teacher, it stood to reason that he would be waiting for her there. Why was he nowhere to be seen? Xavier scanned the area carefully, but there was no trace of Seth to be found. Eventually, he placed his palm lightly on Ancient Sage Meryl's corpse. If he wanted to make sense of this place, the best way to do it was through the Library of Heaven's Path. Flaws. The Library of Heaven's Path jolted, but no book was formed. Xavier shook his head in disappointment. It was hard to tell whether it was because Ancient Sage Meryl was only a corpse at the moment, or that the place had the ability to obstruct the view of the heavens. It should be the latter, Xavier thought as he continued surveying his surroundings. He had used the Library of Heaven's Path on corpses before, and the only limitation was that he was unable to gather much information on the individual's life prior to their death. However, as for the other details, such as the tier of their corpse and so on, it would still have been compiled and reflected in a book. This was rather similar to what usually happened when he checked artifacts. However, the fact that nothing happened meant that the entire place was likely concealed from the heavens. This also explained why no seers had ever been able to uncover the fact that the strongest disciple of Keith Cole was actually dead there. This is an ancient land that hasn't been ravaged by the wars between mankind and the otherworldly demons, and it also offers the hope of recovering a diminished bloodline. Could this be somewhat linked to the reason why Ancient Sage Meryl's corpse is buried here? Xavier began trying to put clues together to reason the happenings there. Aside from the fact that most ancient domains were thin in spiritual energy, making them unsuitable for cultivation, There were actually many mystical things about them. For one, he had transcended over into an ancient domain, as well as the fact that ancient Sage Meryl's corpse had been found here. Could there be any link between those two matters? Xavier activated his Eye of Insight to do a thorough scan once more. There's a passageway down here, Xavier remarked as he stomped his feet lightly. The coffin began to move to the side, revealing the passageway hidden beneath it. He exchanged a glance with Gia for a moment before heading down the passageway. Naturally, Gia quickly followed along as well. The layout of the second hall was an exact replica of the first. Even the locations of the coffins were identical. It really felt as if they were trying to navigate their way through an ancient labyrinth. Other than the coffin, the entire room was empty. There wasn't a single person to be seen.
Teacher, it seems like Senior Seth was here,
Gia suddenly said. Xavier turned to look at Gia.
There's a slight indentation on the wall over there. Judging from the shape, it seems to have been left behind by him,
Gia said as she pointed toward the wall. Turning to look, he found that there was indeed a deep indentation in the wall. The size was a match with Seth's physique. Chances were that it had been created when Seth's back was pressed against the wall. You're right. He might have seen the corpse in this coffin and backed away out of fear, Xavier reasoned out as a spark of curiosity emerged in his eyes. Just what could be in the coffin that would frighten Seth even more than ancient Sage Meryl's corpse? Let's open it and take a look, Xavier instructed as he walked up to the coffin. The lid of the coffin was pried open, revealing a figure right before them. He had a calm and peaceful look on his face, as if he had just been put to rest not too long ago. Seeing this sight, Xavier felt his blood running cold. The corpse that was inside the coffin was none other than Seth. Lying in the coffin, there was a hint of a smile on Seth's face. His body was still warm, and it looked as if he would open his eyes at any moment.
Senior!
Concentrated poison aura seeped out from Gia's body as strong emotions began building up within her. Despite her cold exterior, she did care a lot for the others. While she had put Seth down earlier, just seeing his corpse made it feel as if her heart was going to explode. If she knew who the culprit was, there was no doubt that she would have dashed right in to tear that person into shreds. Control your emotions, Xavier bellowed.
Yes.
Hearing her teacher's words, Gia swiftly snapped out of her condition. Nevertheless, she couldn't stop trembling as she looked at the corpse in the coffin. This isn't Seth, Xavier said. He had also received the shock of his life when he first saw the face of the corpse. However, as he took a closer look, he had swiftly realized that something was amiss. The body was simply too lifelike. There would inevitably be some changes to a person's body after their death, no matter how powerful they might have been in life. Furthermore, he was well aware of Seth's character. He would never be one to accept death so peacefully. Even at the cost of his life, he would surely rip out a bone from the culprit before breathing his last breath. More importantly, he had left a surge of his Heaven's Path gleam in Seth's body, so there was no way that anyone would be able to kill Seth without drawing his notice.
If it isn't Senior Seth, then...
Gia was taken aback by what Xavier was saying. No matter how she looked at or touched the corpse, it was very clear that it belonged to Seth. She couldn't imagine anything in the world that could possibly create such a lifelike replica of him. It's most likely an illusion that blurs the distinction between truth and falsehood. Something that can even deceive the heavens. Xavier murmured as he walked back and forth in the hall. If the one to appear hadn't been Seth, he might not have considered the possibility that it was an illusion. This was because the sight before him was too real, and the Library of Heaven's Path just happened to be defunct in here.
An illusion?
Gia looked around her before eventually pinching her own cheeks.
Ouch!
Dragonbone Divine Spear, Xavier called out. The Dragonbone Divine Spear flew over from the passageway in the form of a spear. With his spear in hand, Xavier felt boundless strength surging into his body. He raised the tip of it and directed it right toward the stone coffin. The coffin was pierced through, and the entire chamber dissipated like bubbles. The next instant, they saw Seth lying diagonally by the wall, unmoving. From the looks of it, it seemed like he had just passed out. What was right before them wasn't a coffin, but a massive barrier that resembled a mirror. It seemed like the two of them had walked into the world within the mirror, thus blurring their perception of reality.
It's actually an illusion,
The Dragonbone Divine Spear exclaimed excitedly.
if that's the case. Could the old master's corpse be a fake as well? So the old master actually isn't dead yet.
It had been a huge blow to him seeing his old master's corpse appearing right before his eyes. Since this was all an illusion, could that corpse possibly be an illusion as well? I am sorry, but Ancient Sage Meryl's body was likely real. Xavier shook his head. It's the sheer power of his corpse that's been sustaining everything here. If his body had been a fake, this place wouldn't have been concealed from the heavens. As much as he hated to shatter the Dragonbone Divine Spear's hopes, the truth was the truth. The moment that the illusion dissipated, he had come to realize the truth as well. An illusion that he had initially been unable to discern and was able to deceive even the heavens was bound to require a vast amount of energy in order to sustain it. And the very center of this formation was Ancient Sage Meryl's corpse. Only the second strongest Ancient Sage in the world could possibly have the ability to beguile him, such that he failed to notice that he was in an illusion for a moment.
So the old master is really dead.
The Dragonbone Divine Spear fell to the floor weakly. If the corpse was real, it meant that Ancient Sage Meryl was truly dead. It's still too early to say whether Ancient Sage Meryl is truly dead or not. Just because the corpse is real doesn't mean that he's already passed away. Take the old Sovereign Ozias, for example. His body's already been buried and his cultivation's already been passed on to Jesse. However, his soul has been taken away by a deity from the Azure, and there's a good chance that he could be revived in the future, Xavier said. Those who've become as strong as Ancient Sage Meryl are unlikely to die this easily. Even Vicious could revive despite being divided into so many pieces, let alone Ancient Sage Meryl. Even if the corpse was real, as long as his soul remained, he couldn't be said to be dead in the truest sense. Hearing that explanation, the Dragonbone Divine Spear's glazed eyes cleared up a little as it heaved a sigh of relief.
You're right.
First, we have to wake Seth up, Xavier said. Something must have happened for him to be unconscious. With a tap of his finger, he sent a surge of Heaven's Path gleam into his student's body. A few moments later, Seth slowly opened his eyes. Seth had always been an extremely strong-willed individual, and for even someone like him to be knocked out cold, it was likely that he had received some kind of astonishing shock that resulted in an intense fluctuation in his state of mind. Teacher! Seth's face reddened as he quickly got to his feet. You were the one who entered this room first. What happened in here for you to pass out like this? Gia asked. Rubbing his head to alleviate the splitting headache in his mind, Seth took a deep breath before he began his explanation. I found the passageway leading here, and there was this hall, similar to the one above. There was a coffin as well, and when I opened it to take a look, I saw Keith Cole's body. Keith Cole's body? Xavier frowned. They had seen Seth's body, whereas Seth had seen Keith Cole's body. Was there some kind of link between the two? Regardless of what's happening here, it's likely to have something to do with this barrier. I'm certain that this place has something to do with Keith Cole. Unable to make a precise deduction with the limited evidence they had here, Xavier decided to put the matter aside for the moment and worked on things that were more certain. Thus, he turned his gaze toward the massive mirror-like barrier in front of him. The answers that he sought were likely to be beyond there. The only problem left was to figure out a way to get to the other side. Let me give it a try, Xavier raised the Dragonbone Divine Spear in his hand and pierced straight ahead. The spear tore through space, ripping a hole right through the world. In a flash, it struck the barrier squarely. A massive energy wave swept across the area. Xavier's body stiffened a little before being forcefully knocked back. His back crashed heavily into the wall, causing his face to turn pale and his breathing to become a little ragged. In a brief moment, he had already sustained significant injuries. It didn't work? Xavier was astonished. His might, paired with the Dragonbone Divine Spear, now even granted him the strength to put up a fight against the deity that he had met previously. Considering that he had put his full strength behind the pierce, it was unthinkable that he had failed to inflict the slightest damage on the barrier. On the contrary, he had suffered a backlash so severe that he had almost spurted blood. It was insane. Just what in the world was the barrier made of to be so terrifying?
Master, let me give it a try.
Vicious's voice sounded in his mind. Go ahead. Xavier nodded as he released Vicious from the Book of Heaven's pack. Vicious had already completed his body, and he had assimilated the straw garment. His current strength could be said to be on par with Dimension Shatterer Realm primary stage cultivators. If he made a move, he just might be able to destroy the barrier. A massive pair of hands reached out from the book, causing the entire underground hall to tremble non-stop as if there was an earthquake. The massive hands slammed powerfully upon the barrier. A powerful shockwave gushed out into the surroundings, forcing Xavier and the others to back away uncontrollably. By the time the storm calmed down, they turned their sights to the barrier once more, only to see it still intact. There wasn't the slightest damage to be seen. On the other hand, Vicious's fingers had started bleeding.
Master, let me give it another try.
With his attack failing to breach the barrier at all, Vicious lowered his head in embarrassment. There's no need for that. If you make another move, it's likely that the entire underground hall will collapse on us, Xavier said. The underground hall was already at its limits after the multiple physical impacts. If they continued, there was no doubt that it would collapse on them. Of course, given their strength, they wouldn't sustain the slightest damage. What was worrisome were the countless citizens of Olmec Royal City living above. The might of the ancient sages was simply too great. If the strength of a Dimension Shatterer Realm cultivator ran amok in the slightest, the city could very well be reduced to a living hell.
What should we do then?
Well, we can't do it the forceful way. Well, there's bound to be another way to bypass this barrier, Xavier said with a smile. The fact that even a Dimension Shatterer Realm cultivator like you is unable to breach it means that this barrier was set up by Keith Cole. Going down this line of thought, I think I should be able to figure something out. The reason Xavier had Vicious make a move was to test the limits of the barrier. The fact that it could withstand Vicious's attack meant that it likely had something to do with Keith Cole. Taking a deep breath, Xavier walked up to the barrier and infused his Celestial Master Teacher aura within. Given that they were both Celestial Master Teachers, perhaps this might be the key to resolving the bottleneck before him. As the aura flowed in, the barrier suddenly began wavering. Countless insights regarding education and mentorship flowed into his head, leaving him with a deeper impression of the Master Teacher occupation. It was as if all of the ideals that Keith Cole embraced had been imparted to him. Using the world as an example, one can right their minds to align with nature and encompass everything in the world. A voice echoed in Xavier's mind. It could have been a lingering thought from Keith Cole, but at the same time, it seemed like it was his own interpretation as well. A Celestial Master Teacher was a Master Teacher recognized by the heavens. Using the heavens as an example, Celestial Master Teachers were able to swiftly rise through the ranks. However, if they wished to surpass the heavens, the difficulties they would face were many-fold. Jesse, Seth, and the others, for example, had learned under him as his direct disciples, allowing their cultivation to rise far beyond the speed of ordinary cultivators. However, if they wished to surpass him, well, this was something that they would never be able to achieve in their lifetime. It was not that they were weak, but most of their cultivation techniques that they had practiced came from him, and it had formed the foundation of their cultivation. If they wanted to surpass him, they would either have to gain a deeper understanding of his cultivation techniques, or overthrow everything that they had learned before. Keith Cole had more than 3,000 students in the world, but not a single one of them was able to surpass him. From that, it was apparent how difficult it was to surpass one's lineage.
I think I understand. I'm a celestial master teacher, a master teacher acknowledged by the heavens. In other words, my existence is viewed to be beneath the heavens. As such, it's nigh impossible for me to comprehend any rules that surpass them. Since that's the case, why should I remain as a celestial master teacher?
It was as if enlightenment had suddenly struck Xavier as his eyes widened in realization. Since you deny me my breakthrough, I shall be a celestial master teacher no more. I shall become the world's teacher. If he wished to achieve a breakthrough to Ancient Sage, he would be able to do it easily through his spear quintessence, saber quintessence, or even fist quintessence and the like. However, once he did so, everything would be settled. It would be nigh impossible for him to find a path unique to him anymore. As such, he had been searching for something that he could say that was his and his alone. This was also why he had been suppressing his cultivation all along, refusing to achieve a breakthrough over the past 2 months. And at that very moment, he seemed to have found a direction. The fact that he could receive the acknowledgement of the heavens to become a celestial master teacher meant that the world was sentient. Since that was the case, why did he necessarily have to be the one being acknowledged? Why couldn't he become its teacher instead? If one took the world as an example and learned from it, one would never be able to surpass the limits of the world. On the other hand, as the world's teacher, his position would be above the world right from the start. Naturally, the path leading to ancient sagehood would then be much smoother than ever.
However, becoming the world's teacher is easier said than done. I have to understand the world and grasp its strengths and flaws. Only then will I become worthy of that position. More importantly, I have to forsake my title as a celestial master teacher. His mind churned at an incredible speed in order to fully map out a feasible plan. Once he had confirmed his direction, he closed his eyes and decisively released all of his celestial master teacher aura at once. All gains were bound to be accompanied by some losses. If one wanted to fill a sack with gold ingots, one would first have to toss away the silver ingots in it. While the celestial master teacher might be a position that almost all desired, it had become nothing more than a restriction to him. Thus, there was no pity in casting it away. His success had always been built on his diligence, tenacity, upright character, and unyielding spirit. As for the role of celestial master teacher, that was a mere transient title. As his state of mind settled down, he began expelling the energy that he had absorbed from his 5 acknowledgments of celestial master teacher. An aura so concentrated gushed out and rose through the ground above into the azure sky like a pillar of light. Reaching the tip of the world, it exploded and transformed into innumerable currents of energy that dissipated into the surroundings. As the celestial master teacher aura dissipated, Xavier's will slowly floated into the sky. The will of the heavens crushed down on it, commencing a battle of willpower. At the Bander Empire Master Teacher Pavilion. The path of teacherhood is centered around 3 aspects: the impartation of knowledge, the proper conduct of one's character, and the enlightenment of one's heart. The reason Keith Cole's teachings were able to reach everyone in the world is due to the lack of discrimination in his impartation. His heart was vast enough to encompass the world, As a master teacher, you should constantly bear your responsibility in mind. The lineages of mankind must properly be passed down from generation to generation in order to ensure our survival through the ages. A bunch of newly qualified master teachers were standing before the teacher acknowledgement hall, and an elder was lecturing them with a solemn look on his face. Yes, the master teachers nodded in response. From the moment that they became master teachers, they came to know of their responsibilities and they chose to accept the burden. For tens of thousands of years, the Master Teacher Pavilion had both been respected and humiliated by the population. Nevertheless, the reason it was able to withstand the trial of time and remain at the top of the world was because of the unchanging spirit passed down across the generations. Wonderful. Kneel down and pay respects to the ancestors. The elder was just about to step aside to allow the newly qualified master teachers to pay respects to the ancestral tablets when the ground suddenly started trembling. The ancestral tablets placed neatly on the altar began to shake nonstop. All of the ancestral tablets then fell down simultaneously, and they were all facing the same direction. What's going on? The elder widened his eyes in shock. He quickly turned toward where the ancestral tablets had fallen, and he caught sight of a silhouette formed out of clouds and rainbows. Dressed in a long robe, that figure seemed to tower over the entire world, making it impossible to see his full body. The figure was faced away from them, but the aura that he emanated made others dare not look at him directly. Instead, it seemed to compel one to bow down before him. That is a celestial master teacher, the elder exclaimed as his body stiffened in shock. In all of history, the only person who was known to have been a celestial master teacher was Keith Cole himself. Many master teachers had sought to emulate his path afterward, but no matter how hard they tried, they had been unable to accomplish that feat. Yet at that very moment, there was another celestial master teacher among them. Unable to hold back his agitation any longer, the elder kneeled to the ground and bowed. The elder glared at the newly appointed master teachers, who were still blanked out from the abrupt turn of events, and bellowed, "A new celestial master teacher has descended among us. The era of prosperity lies right ahead. Hurry up and bow down." Yes. The crowd quickly got to their knees and bowed deeply. The information regarding a celestial master teacher was only passed down within the Master Teacher Pavilion. But at this very moment, countless people were witnessing this sight together. The faraway figure had his legs firmly planted in the air, and his body was shouldering the weight of the heavens. There was a sign of utmost intimacy with the world, but the figure pushed the two away with a look of disdain on his face. He was actually scorning the heavens. Wait a minute. One of the master teachers bowing on the ground noticed that something was amiss. Aren't celestial master teachers individuals who've earned the recognition of the heavens? Why does it seem like that person is looking down on the heavens? Logically speaking, when a celestial master teacher received the acknowledgement of the heavens, they should accept it with the utmost pride and glory. Yet the towering person was trying his best to shake it off, as if something disgusting had latched onto him. Looking down on the heavens? Stunned by that remark, the elder raised his head, only to see the towering figure shaking his body wildly. He was desperately trying to prevent any of the aura that had come from the heavens from getting stuck to him. The elder gulped before muttering with reddened eyes, "He's actually rejecting the acknowledgement of the heavens. Does he not want to be a celestial master teacher anymore?" The history of Keith Cole's acknowledgments as a celestial master teacher had been fully detailed in the records and passed down through the ages. Even though many years had passed since then, the significance of a celestial master teacher had never vanished from the minds of the population. But somehow, events didn't seem to be going in the direction that they were expected to go in. At the same time,
When the other master teachers around the elder heard his words, tears began brimming in their eyes. While they were feeling deeply stifled by the happenings, the figure in the sky suddenly bellowed before kicking at the heavens, which had latched onto his leg.
Wham!
A rift appeared in the sky.
He's indeed abandoning his position as a celestial master teacher.
If there had still been any doubts previously, they had completely vanished without a trace now. It was obvious that the towering figure no longer wanted to be a celestial master teacher, but the relentless heavens simply refused to back down, and continued trying to suffuse the towering figure with their aura.
Who in the world is that fellow?
Unable to take it any longer, the elder leaned in to try and take a closer look. He wanted to know the identity of the man who was so heartlessly shattering their image of a celestial master teacher. For tens of thousands of years, every master teacher desired the acknowledgement of the heavens. Such a feat meant the resounding of their name through the ages and the continued inheritance of their lineage through thousands of generations. Yet that fellow was trying to shake off the heavens, as if they were pests on his hands, going to the extent of even stomping on the ladder. It was at this moment that the towering figure in the sky turned around toward them, revealing his appearance. He was a dashing young man in his early 20s with sharp eyebrows.
Isn't that Xavier Matthews? But I thought he was dead.
The elder was taken aback. The Master Teacher Pavilion had once issued an arrest warrant on that young man across the entire Master Teacher continent, such that every Master Teacher then knew his name. Afterward, things had gotten worse, and eventually the young man had ended his life at the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters. A person who should have died 3 months ago. How could he possibly bounce back to life and even be a celestial master teacher at that? What in the world had happened in between then? It was as if the story had jumped from the prologue to the epilogue all of a sudden. The master teachers in the area were flabbergasted by this unexpected happening. The same scene was occurring in every other master teacher pavilion across the world. Countless master teachers looked at the towering figure in the air with reddened eyes. Some were even crying miserably, exclaiming that they had lived in vain. It was way too much. For someone to reject even being a celestial master teacher. Could anyone be more arrogant than that? In the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters, a group of ancient sages and 9-star master teachers were gathered together in a stately room. So that's what happened, Master K said. The otherworldly demonic tribe's almost been unified, so we can be certain that it no longer poses a threat to us. This means that it's time for our Master Teacher Pavilion to shift its strategic goals and manpower deployment. We should devote more resources into imparting the wisdom of the predecessors and nurturing young talents.
Master K, if I understand your words correctly, you're saying that not only did Master Xavier not betray mankind, he's even a celestial master teacher as well. The reason he ended his life here was to use the incident as a cover to sneak into the otherworldly demonic tribe and resolve the threat once and for all. A 9-star master teacher asked with a deep frown on his forehead, seemingly unwilling to believe this tall tale. Indeed, Master K nodded. However, some of what I've shared so far is still conjecture on my part, so we will need some further verification. Nevertheless, I'm 90% certain of the matter.
As long as we can't fully verify the matter, there's a chance that your conjecture might fall true. With all due respect, Master K, I find it hard to believe your story. If Master Xavier's truly a celestial master teacher, he should have reported it to the Master Teacher Pavilion. Why would he hide his identity?
I don't deny that he has a way of imparting knowledge to others, but going to the extent of saying that he's a celestial master teacher seems a little too far-fetched, even to me. Indeed, all of us here are familiar with Keith Cole's compassionate temperament and benevolent heart. I've browsed through Master Xavier's records, and I don't think that he has the character needed to be acknowledged by the heavens.
Some master teachers posed their doubts. It wasn't that they were intentionally making things hard for Master K, but it had been tens of thousands of years since a celestial master teacher last appeared. Furthermore, the person who was said to be a celestial master teacher was someone who had a relationship with the spirit god of the otherworldly demonic tribe. It was inevitable that there would be some doubtful naysayers. I'm afraid that you're mistaking my intention. I'm not opening this matter up for discussion. I'm informing you of it. I will permit you to discuss it among yourselves behind closed doors, but for the time being, we are going to proceed with this meeting under this premise. Master K replied sharply. The reason he had chosen to roam the world was because he didn't like that the Master Teacher Pavilion had already strayed from its original intentions. He wanted to make use of this opportunity to correct things, but it was truly frustrating how he was facing obstacles every step of the way. He knew that there was no way to fully convince those Master Teachers, so he chose to take a more forceful approach. I'm willing to go on with the meeting under such a premise, if that's what you wish, but I refuse to believe that he's a celestial master teacher. If even he's able to become a celestial master teacher, there's no reason the rest of us can't. One of the 9-star master teachers replied indignantly, but in the midst of his words, the ground suddenly began to tremble. Alarmed, the crowd quickly left the room to look outward, and they soon saw a familiar figure towering in the sky. A unique aura originating from the world was surging toward him, attempting to enter through his apertures and fill his body. Who else could that familiar figure possibly be other than Master Xavier, who had ended his life at the Master Teacher Pavilion headquarters 3 months prior?
That is the aura bestowed by the predecessors during the acknowledgement ceremony. No, that's not the aura from our predecessors. It's the aura bestowed from the world on a celestial master teacher.
As 9-star master teachers, they swiftly comprehended what was going on with just a glance. However, just because they were able to comprehend it didn't mean that their minds were capable of processing it in a moment's time. That was a historic moment where an entire group of 9-star master teachers and ancient sages stood with slackened jaws and widened eyes. Just a moment earlier, some had claimed that there was no way that Xavier could be a celestial master teacher. It was as if the other party was carefully timing his actions in order to bring about the greatest face slap to them.
Wait a moment. He doesn't seem to be accepting the acknowledgement at all. On the contrary, it seems like he's trying to free himself from that identity.
It didn't take long for someone to notice the anomaly.
Now that you mention it, that does seem to be the case. Master Xavier seems to be trying to expel the celestial aura within his body.
A celestial master teacher casting away the aura bestowed from the heavens. Is he out of his mind?
The sheer preposterousness of what they were seeing had exceeded the limits of what they could rationally process. All they could do was shake their heads and murmur words of disapproval as they watched Xavier flinging out the aura from his body with a look of disgust on his face, as if he was purging his body of some repulsive poison. Even the heavens seemed to be a little taken aback by the situation. Such a thing had simply never happened before. Do you still think that he isn't a celestial master teacher? Master K asked as he gulped down a mouthful of saliva. His senior was truly an extraordinary individual. Everything he did was able to leave one utterly shocked. Becoming a celestial master teacher was something that everyone desired, but he was so frantically trying to free himself from it, such that it almost looked as if he was a heartless man trying to dump his girlfriend. The world was really going mad.
He is a celestial master teacher. We were right.
Those 9-star master teachers who had doubted Master K's words earlier felt a fiery pain on their cheeks. If there was a pit in the ground, they would have dove right in without a moment's hesitation. It was truly embarrassing how they had to swallow their words a moment after making such confident declarations. Sighing deeply at Xavier's actions, Master K turned toward the 9-star master teacher who had argued with him a moment ago. You said earlier that there's no reason why the rest of you can't be celestial master teachers if Master Xavier is one, right? Since he's going to shake away his identity right now, why don't you give it a try? Given all the miracles that his senior had produced, this bunch of people still dared to doubt Xavier's credentials as a celestial master teacher. The man burst into tears. While Xavier was relinquishing his title as a celestial master teacher by releasing the aura that he had absorbed in his 5 previous acknowledgments, a huge uproar erupted across the entire master teacher continent. Previously, when Xavier had obtained the acknowledgement from the heavens, the phenomena that occurred had mostly been limited to the regional master teacher pavilions. In view of the severity of the issue, the master teacher pavilions had chosen to suppress the matter, so there weren't many people who were aware of it. However, at that moment, nearly every single living being on the Master Teacher continent was witnessing the release and dissipation of the heavens aura back to the world with their own eyes. They would really have to be fools if they still didn't get what was happening. It wasn't easy for another celestial master teacher to appear on the continent once more, but who would have thought that the other party would quit just like that?
As expected of teacher.
The reverence reflected in Nathaniel Matthews's eyes was more than what any words could possibly bring out. Upon discovering his teacher's identity, he hadn't hesitated to become the latter's student. Yet it turned out that his teacher didn't even care about that identity at all, throwing it away without the slightest hesitation. As expected of someone who had already seen past the material world, things such as glory and honor weren't even worth a gold coin to him. While the whole world was going into a frenzy due to the happenings, Xavier was still sitting in front of the barrier, forcefully expelling the energy in his body. Unless he emptied out the aura that he had received from the previous Celestial Master Teacher acknowledgments from his body, there was no way that he would be able to become the world's teacher. Even as the heavens exerted a pressure so great that it seemed as if his soul would be crushed to bits, Xavier maintained a nonchalant look on his face. It was impossible to tell what was going through his mind. In truth, he harbored some doubts about relinquishing his Celestial Master Teacher title as well. He knew of the significance of the title, after all. However, when he came into contact with the barrier and inherited Keith Cole's philosophy, he had become certain that this was the path that Keith Cole had walked on as well. Otherwise, no matter how powerful or talented he might be, he would never be able to go any further than being an ancient sage in this world. It would be impossible for him to break the dimensional barrier and ascend to higher dimensions. The recognition from the heavens of this world was both a blessing and a curse. It served to shackle one down to this world. If he wanted to free himself from his shackles, he would first have to relinquish his identity. As the aura fully dissipated, the pressure coming from the heavens seemed to intensify, as if symbolizing the rage of the heavens at this blasphemous act. Ominous clouds swiftly rolled in together with devastating lightning and flames.
Here it comes,
Xavier murmured as he rose to his feet. However, he remained within the underground hall, not leaving at all. He knew that if he left, the strength of the lightning tribulation would surely ravage the entire Olmec kingdom, destroying every last soul within the perimeter of the tribulation. As long as he remained in the underground hall, the lightning tribulation would have no choice but to concentrate its prowess within the area. It was fortunate that the manor extended far and wide, so it was unlikely that any bystanders would be caught in the conflict. The cataclysmic lightning swiftly gathered in the sky and formed a massive saber with destructive flames and lightning crackling around it. Even the fabric of space seemed to be as feeble as a piece of paper in the face of the powerful saber, and it seemed as if everything would be eradicated in its face. This was the most fearsome trial of the ancient sages, the ordeal of lightning armament. Who would have thought that he would face it once more there as punishment from the heavens? The lightning saber surged right down through the ground toward the underground hall as it became incorporeal, appearing right above Xavier's head in the blink of an eye. The formations around the manor and the underground hall were decisively sliced in two, as if they were mere tattered pieces of cloth.
I've been waiting for you.
Taking a deep breath, Xavier's fist shot right up to strike the lightning saber. The previous time he faced the ordeal of lightning armament, he had been far too weak to be able to withstand its might. However, he was no longer as helpless as he used to be. Even without using the Dragonbone Divine Spear, the might that he exerted would allow him to take down any Blood Reincarnation Realm expert. As the fist and the lightning saber clashed, Xavier found himself knocked several steps back. This momentary clash had left his fist marred with slightly charred flesh and boiling blood. It seemed like, despite the massive increase in his power, his strength was still not up to par with the ordeal of lightning armament. The last time he underwent it, he had needed to summon Little Tribulation, further augmented by summoning hundreds of cultivation ordeals all at once, before it was a match for the ordeal of lightning armament. However, in the Olmec Royal City, there was no way he'd be able to do what he had done previously. Nevertheless, that didn't mean that he was going to go down without a fight. Xavier flitted over to the side of the barrier before turning to face the massive saber once more. Driving his gleam to the maximum, he punched in the direction of the massive saber, which threatened to scorch every inch of his body with the blazing heat it was emanating. Once again, the collision ended with Xavier's defeat as his body was knocked back from the saber, causing a series of energy ripples to traverse across the barrier. On the other hand, the massive saber continued to descend through the stone above with formidable might, striking right down upon the barrier. There was a light buzz as the massive saber inflicted its black flames onto the barrier, causing a small hole to corrode it. However, the black flames only lasted for a brief moment before they were extinguished by the tremendous energy rippling through the barrier. It's working. Xavier's eyes lit up. Part of the reason for him choosing to cultivate and summon the lightning tribulation there was because he wanted to use the power of the lightning tribulation to deal with the barrier. Considering how the barrier was able to withstand both his and Vicious's attacks, it was infeasible to attempt to break it with their strength. Furthermore, even though the barrier had been left behind by Keith Cole, it didn't seem like it would open up solely on the merit that he was a celestial master teacher. Since that was the case, he had no choice but to tap into the external forces to breach the barrier. Opening his fist into a palm, he struck at the massive saber once more. The massive saber retaliated with ferocious slashes time and time again, but most of the energy coming from its attacks was halted by the barrier right behind him. Under the relentless attacks of the saber, cracks began to appear on the surface of the barrier. However, due to the multiple clashes with the saber, Xavier's body also sustained significant damage. Just like when he had faced the ordeal of lightning armament before, he was already on the verge of collapse.
Canvas of 4 seasons!
With a thought, Xavier swapped into the appearance of Sovereign Lorcan with the disguise amulet before taking out the canvas of 4 seasons to release the energy that he had sealed within it. He had stolen this energy from the deity whom Sovereign Lorcan had summoned, and it was exceptionally effective in healing injuries. It took a few moments before Xavier fully recovered. After he was all healed up, he turned his sights toward the massive saber and continued his attacks once more. The massive saber continued striking down on the barrier and him, causing the cracks that had appeared to grow larger and larger, seemingly on the verge of being torn apart at any moment. By this point, the ordeal of lightning armament had already expended a large portion of its energy, making it much weaker than before.
It seems like it's indeed possible to grind it down.
Xavier heaved a sigh of relief. The risk had paid off. Even though he wasn't the world's teacher yet, it seemed like he would be able to free himself from the position as a celestial master teacher, allowing his cultivation to rise once more. At the same time, he would probably be able to shatter whatever was left of the barrier. He had no idea what lay on the other side, but considering the secrecy surrounding it, he had a feeling that the 100 schools of philosophers might have something to do with it. Even if the 100 schools of philosophers wasn't involved, it was bound to have something to do with Keith Cole. As long as he traced his footsteps, he'd eventually be able to ascend to a higher dimension. As the ordeal of lightning armament struck down another 2 more times, the cracks grew larger and larger to the extent that they were already large enough for a person to pass through. At the same time, the ominous clouds in the sky were starting to dissipate. Another few breaths passed, and it seemed like the ordeal of lightning armament had finally reached its limits. The multitude of attacks that it had launched had completely sapped its energy. With a light tap of Xavier's finger, it dissipated into countless strands of energy. "Let's enter." Finally overcoming the lightning tribulation, Xavier beckoned the others before diving right into the hole in the barrier. Seth and Gia nodded. The latter dissipated the poison in Carlton, and they both swiftly sent a message to Sarah before following their teacher to the other side of the barrier. What appeared before Xavier was a vast world. The blue sky dabbled with traces of white clouds extended far and wide. Greenery flourished from the earth, creating a peaceful scene that went well with the melodious chirping of birds. The spiritual energy in the air was so concentrated that it was on par with the most blessed land back on the Master-Teacher continent. Not too far away from where Xavier was standing, there was farmland filled with wheat.
"Where are we?"
Gia asked with a confused frown as she slowly walked out from the darkness. She drove her gleam carefully for fear that there would be danger lurking in the area. "It's probably some sort of ancient domain," Seth replied. Xavier carefully assessed his surroundings as he slowly proceeded over to the farmland. He bent down before one of the wheat plants and plucked it out in order to conduct a closer examination. A moment later, he chuckled softly and asked, "Have you noticed?" "Noticed?" The two youths replied in bewilderment to Xavier's abrupt question. Seth walked closer to take a closer look at the wheat stalk in Xavier's hand before remarking, "The wheat over here seems to be much bulkier than what we can grow on the Master-Teacher continent. It seems to retain more spiritual energy from the surroundings, too."
"You are right. The wheat here seems to be infused with much more spiritual energy."
Gia nodded with a slightly confused look still on her face. She couldn't understand why her teacher was more interested in a stalk of wheat than figuring out where they were and what they should do. As ancient sages, they could continue living without any problems even if they went without food. As such, agricultural produce and the like no longer caught their attention. This is Greenspout Wheat. Due to the high concentration of spiritual energy it contains, an ordinary human will be able to enhance their constitution if they consume it for a long period. Take your innate poison body, for example. If you had consumed the Greenspout Wheat from a young age, you wouldn't have had to go through so much pain. Instead, you would have easily awakened your unique constitutions. It was the potency of Gia's innate poison body, to the extent that she was unable to awaken or control it, that caused a huge strain on her body, resulting in her constant feeble condition back when she was younger. If not for her father, Walt, going to great lengths to find all sorts of treasures to sustain her life, there was no way she would have survived long enough to meet Xavier. If she had eaten this Greenspout Wheat from a young age, her constitution would have been strengthened significantly, allowing her to better cope with her unique constitutions. Perhaps she would have been spared from much suffering, and Walt wouldn't have lost his life over a single stalk of medicinal herb. If this Greenspout Wheat is that formidable, wouldn't it be a blessing to mankind if we could bring it back to the Master-Teacher continent and cultivate it? Seth's eyes lit up in excitement. As the head of the Combat Master Hall, he had to constantly push himself to think of issues from a higher perspective. There were also medicinal herbs on the Master-Teacher continent that could enhance one's constitution, but those medicinal herbs couldn't be cultivated on a large scale due to the stringent conditions required for their survival. On the other hand, the fact that the Greenspout Wheat was growing in large fields here meant that it was possible to cultivate it on a large scale. If they could enhance the constitution of mankind as a whole, there was no doubt that it would be a huge blessing to mankind. The reason mankind had been unable to claim the absolute advantage in the battle against the otherworldly demonic tribe, despite the efforts of countless master teachers, was because the starting point of the otherworldly demons was simply too far ahead of their human counterparts. Even the otherworldly demons with the weakest bloodlines were bestowed with the strength of a transcendent mortal from birth. This difference in the starting points created a gap that was nigh impossible to bridge with effort alone. In fact, it could be said to be a miraculous feat that mankind had been able to survive for so many years in the face of the otherworldly demonic tribe's aggression. Knowing what Seth was thinking of, Xavier replied with a shake of his head. It's impossible to cultivate the Greenspout Wheat on the Master Teacher continent. The existence of this plant wasn't detailed in any of the records of the Master Teacher Pavilion. Instead, he found it amid the knowledge from the Mountain of Books in the Temple of Confucius. This was a plant that Keith Cole had conceptualized in accordance with his vision, and it should have been non-existent in their world. Xavier had to verify time and time again before he could be certain that the plant he was holding was indeed Greenspout Wheat. Why not? Seth asked. It was true that the spiritual energy here was considerably more concentrated than that of the Master Teacher continent, but given their capabilities, it should be possible for them to create large enclosed spaces that emulated this environment. Why would it be impossible for them to cultivate it on the Master Teacher continent? In the many years of battle with the otherworldly demonic tribe, the atmosphere of the Master Teacher continent's already become suffused with their killing intent, albeit in nearly undetectable amounts to us. Unfortunately, the Greenspout Wheat is exceptionally vulnerable to killing intent, such that even the slightest contact with it can lead to its death. As Xavier explained, he tapped his finger lightly and infused the field before him with a surge of gleam harnessing a slight hint of killing intent. Like a droplet of ink falling in the midst of clear water, the Greenspout Wheat turned yellow and fell limp in an instant. It was almost as if someone had set the crops in the entire area ablaze. Seth and Gia were surprised. Even Xavier was slightly taken aback by how sensitive the Greenspout Wheat was. While he had known that Greenspout Wheat was exceptionally vulnerable to killing intent, he didn't think that it would be so weak to it. He had controlled the killing intent in that surge of gleam to an extremely minute amount, but it had still ended up afflicting such devastation upon the entire field. As such, there was no way those plants could possibly survive on the Master Teacher continent. There are also quite a few otherworldly demons hidden on the Master Teacher continent, causing there to be a slight concentration of killing intent in the air from them. While it's negligible and perhaps even imperceptible to most humans, it's more than enough to spell a catastrophe to the Greenspout Wheat, Xavier remarked. Seth and Gia nodded in agreement.
The lands of the Olmec Kingdom aren't plagued with killing intent, right? So shouldn't it be possible for us to cultivate the Greenspout Wheat there?
Gia asked. She had noticed as soon as she entered the Olmec Kingdom that there was a natural barrier in the ancient domain that seemed to prevent the killing intent lingering in the atmosphere from corroding its lands. In other words, the Olmec Kingdom was devoid of killing intent. Well, you're right to say that there isn't any killing intent in the Olmec Kingdom, but it's a pity that its spiritual energy is simply insufficient. And furthermore, haven't you noticed that there isn't a unique aura that allows one to advance as a master teacher there? Xavier replied. Gia pondered for a moment before nodding slowly in response. She hadn't paid particular attention to the matter since it didn't affect her as a poison master. However, that did seem to be the case. There was no killing intent in the entire Olmec Kingdom, but the conditions required for master teachers to advance to higher ranks were also absent. As such, one who wanted to become a master teacher had no choice but to depart from the Olmec Kingdom and head elsewhere. Even August, whom they had met earlier, had become a 2-star master teacher because he had migrated to other kingdoms. Most ancient domains are barren places, devoid of any auras and poor in spiritual energy. While killing intent is completely absent in the Olmec Kingdom, its climate is still unsuitable for the growth of Greenspout Wheat. Even if Greenspout Wheat is able to survive in the Olmec Kingdom, it wouldn't be able to germinate and grow, Xavier replied with a sigh. It was after he forsook his Celestial Master Teacher title that he gained a clearer view of the Olmec Kingdom. With just a glance, he was able to see right into the crux of the issue. He was still unable to figure out the reason behind the anomalies present in the ancient domain, but he was certain that the Greenspout Wheat would be unable to thrive there. Otherwise, Keith Cole would have turned that ancient domain into the core of the Master Teacher continent. Even though the Greenspout Wheat won't grow in ancient domains, it seems to be flourishing well here. Just what kind of place have we entered? Seth wondered in curiosity. For something that wouldn't survive anywhere else to actually thrive in this land, could there be something special here? Xavier pondered for a moment before replying, "If I'm not mistaken, this is probably the Cax domain, where the 100 schools of philosophers reside. This area is unlike any of the other folded spaces that we've entered. Instead, it's already developed to become a brand new world." The 100 schools of philosophers? Seth and Geo widened their eyes in astonishment. Just as they were about to ask further about the matter, the sound of a horn suddenly echoed from afar, following which a large group of people suddenly rushed over with wrathful looks on their faces. This group of people were dressed in ordinary-looking shirts with short sleeves. Their hands were equipped with hoes, machetes, spades, and all kinds of farming tools, and they seemed to be ready to wage a war.
They're cultivation realms,
Seth muttered with widened eyes. The group of people before them were ordinary civilians who couldn't have appeared more normal. Their counterparts on the Master-Teacher continent wouldn't even be fighters. Yet, every single one of them was actually at Master Realm.
They haven't cultivated at all. There's no trace of gleam in their bodies.
Geo was also taken aback. From the heavy footsteps of this group of people, she could tell that there was no gleam in their auras. Without a doubt, none of them were cultivators. Despite never absorbing spiritual energy and refining it into gleam, they were already emanating the aura of Master Realm cultivators.
This is likely the effects of consuming the Greenspout Wheat for extended periods of time, resulting in some development in their constitutions,
Xavier explained.
They're no longer ordinary humans.
Such a situation was probably related to the Greenspout Wheat. Their genes had been refined by the Greenspout Wheat over many generations, causing a fundamental change in their constitution. As a result of these changes, they had been born with strength superior to other humans at birth, much like the otherworldly demons. Seth's eyes lit up in excitement. He was already moved by the idea when he heard his teacher's words, but seeing the miraculous effects of the Greenspout Wheat in action, he felt as if he saw endless possibilities for the advancement of mankind. If everyone on the Master-Teacher continent became like this group of people, they would really be able to stand up against the otherworldly demonic tribe fearfully, even if something eventually went wrong. While one's starting point wasn't everything, there was no denying that it played a significant role in deciding how high one would be able to reach in the future. Without a doubt, being born with strength comparable to Master Realm cultivators would be a huge boost. This was really a step closer to achieving Keith Cole's ideal of creating a prosperous and powerful society for mankind.
Who in the world are you? How dare you destroy our crops?
The encircling crowd slowly marched up to Xavier as they bellowed furiously. The one leading the group of men was an elder who appeared to be 80 years old. But despite his advanced age, he was brimming with energy. His hair and beard were still colored a youthful black, and his movements were vigorous. Even though he hadn't cultivated, his cultivation had reached the highest level beneath Transcendent Mortal, Glory Realm. Glory Realm experts were able to snub even Emperor Joffrey of the Olmec Kingdom, but these villagers were able to reach that level just by aging. This was something that no one would believe possible outside.
I apologize for my careless action. I didn't mean to ruin your crops. I'm willing to compensate you for them,
Xavier said apologetically as he took out a pile of medicinal herbs and weapons. While they were already the least expensive goods in his storage ring, they were still commodities that would fetch a relatively high price anywhere else. Seeing such a sight, the crowd who had marched over here with gusto suddenly halted. They were unable to accurately identify the value of any of the artifacts before them, but they were still able to feel the incredible spiritual energy gushing out from them. The reason that they had dashed there was because they had found that intruders had damaged their farmland. But even the ruined wheat field couldn't begin to compare to the treasures laid out before their eyes.
You are going to give us those as compensation?
The elder dared not believe what was happening.
That's right,
Xavier replied with a smile.
Please feel free to take them. But to be honest, I have some questions that I hope that you'll be able to answer. The elder quickly instructed the villagers to inspect the treasures, and after confirming that they were invaluable artifacts, he couldn't help but feel a little giddy. He hurriedly shook his head to snap out of his state and said,
What is it? Ask anything you like.
Given that the other party had spoken to them humbly and given them such generous compensation, there was no way that he could stay angry at them. It's actually the first time that three of us have come here, so may I ask where we are? Xavier asked.
You are in our stone village, which is located within the territories of the Estate of Edification.
Stone village? A state of edification? Xavier frowned. Pardon me, but, what's the estate of edification? The villagers were confused by the question, but a middle-aged man suddenly spoke up.
It's one of the areas of jurisdiction under the lineage of ancient Sage Ivo.
Ancient Sage Ivo? Xavier nodded slowly in realization. Ancient Sage Ivo was one of the 72 sages under Keith Cole's lineage. While his reputation paled far in comparison to Merrill, Kieran, and the others, his name had still appeared frequently back in Keith Cole's era. Ancient Sage Ivo was known to be skilled in agriculture. Perhaps while the idea of the Greenspout Wheat was conceptualized by Keith Cole, he was the one who had carefully cultured it. Since this area was under the jurisdiction of Ancient Sage Ivo, it meant to say that they were within the territories of the 100 schools of philosophers. He had still been thinking of conducting a thorough investigation even after arriving at the Olmec Kingdom, but who could have known that Seth and the others would stumble upon it so swiftly? May I know where Ancient Sage Ivo's residence is? Given that tens of thousands of years had passed since then, Ancient Sage Ivo himself was bound to have already passed away. Nevertheless, he should still have descendants living in the area. If he wished to trace Keith Cole's footsteps and uncover what he did and where he went after capturing that deity, he would first have to find the experts of the 100 schools of philosophers.
The residence of the ancient sage is located in Newfeld City. It's quite far away from here, though. If you're in no rush, why don't I have Emma from our village take you there?
The elder asked.
Emma is our village belle. She is a cultivator, and she has a spirit beast under her command. If you were to ride her spirit beast, you should be able to get to Newfeld City far faster.
Village belle? Xavier shook his head politely. It's, fine. That would be imposing too much on you. It'll be fine as long as you just point out the direction of Newfeld City to me.
No, you aren't imposing on us at all. It is our pleasure to be of assistance to you. Newfeld City is a major city, and not just anyone can enter it. If you attempt to go in despite not being a local, it's very likely that you'll be arrested and interrogated. It'll be much safer for you to have Emma lead you there. She's far more familiar with the area, and it'll be more convenient for you to move around with her by your side.
The elder replied affirmatively, not leaving any room for rebuttal at all. It was true that the group before him had destroyed their farmland, but they had willingly offered generous compensation while maintaining a polite attitude. Naturally, they would welcome them with hospitality. Seeing that the elder was adamant on the matter, Xavier could only hesitantly nod in agreement. The stone village wasn't a large village. All in all, there were only around 100 households. When the rest of the village heard that there were guests with treasures, they swiftly rushed out of their houses to welcome them warmly. Soon, the rumored village belle appeared as well. She was not a top-notch beauty, but her looks were decent and pleasing to the eye. In a small village like this, it was understandable that she would be considered the village belle. As she walked over, Seth looked at her and murmured, "Transcendent mortal level 2. Just as the elder had said earlier, she was a cultivator. Through the gleam flowing through her body, it wasn't too difficult to see that her cultivation was at Transcendent Mortal Level 2. Emma walked up to Xavier and the others and spoke haughtily with raised eyebrows.
I can take you to Newfeld City, but I'd like to remind you that the residence of Ancient Sage Ivo is not a place where anyone can come and go as they please. You will have to submit your name scrolls in advance if you wish to pay a visit. Know that if you make any trouble, such as rudely barging into the residence and offending those living there, I'm not going to save you."
As the village belle, she had her own pride and dignity. "Rest assured we don't intend on stirring up any trouble," Xavier replied.
While their cultivation had pretty much reached the pinnacle of this world, the reason for them visiting the Cax domain wasn't to start a fight, but to uncover answers. Naturally, there was no reason for them to intentionally get into conflicts with others.
Let it be for the best. Also, I'll just put this out here in case you misunderstand anything. It's only due to the village chief's instruction that I'm leading you to Newfound City. If I had a choice, I'd never accept something as troublesome as this. So don't bother thinking that you'll get together with me or anything just because we're journeying together. I'll only accept confessions of someone from my village. I have no plans of marrying into any other villages at the moment,
Emma said sternly. Frustrated looks appeared on the faces of Xavier and Seth. The beast that Emma had tamed was an eaglebeak beast. It boasted a massive physique, such that it wasn't cramped even with so many people sitting on its back. Seth and Gia had been thinking of flying over to the destination on their own, which would have made it a much faster journey, but recalling their teacher's low-profile personality, they eventually abandoned the thought and sat down quietly on the back of the beast. Seeing the group of three controlling their breathing, Emma asked with a doubtful look in her eyes,
"You're cultivators too?"
She had thought that the group before her was no different from the villagers, ordinary humans devoid of gleam. Who knew that they'd be able to absorb spiritual energy?
"You can say so,"
Seth replied with a smile. Emma heaved a sigh of relief before continuing on with a prideful smile.
"Not bad. Just to let you know, I've also cultivated before. Of everyone in the village, I'm the only one who's cleared the examination and inherited the true heritage of the old village chief."
Not bad," Seth remarked nonchalantly.
"You might not be aware of this, but the old village chief is someone who's inherited ancient sage Ifo's lineage,"
Emma said. Oh? Xavier shot a curious glance over.
"The old village chief went to Newfield City in his earlier years and received the guidance of the experts there. Even though he has aged since then, he's still the strongest individual in our village. It's a pity that you didn't meet him, or else you'd surely be filled with admiration for him, just like me,"
Emma explained. They had only met the incumbent village chief so far, but the strongest person in their village was actually the old village chief. It was because she had cultivated with the old village chief that she had managed to achieve such accomplishments to date. "May I know what cultivation technique you practiced? Were you taught by a master teacher?" Xavier asked out of curiosity. The heritage left behind by ancient sage Ivo couldn't possibly be anything ordinary. Even if Emma had only come into contact with a small sliver of it, he should still be able to tell something about it.
"Master teacher?"
Emma frowned in confusion. It seemed to be a foreign term to her. "It's an occupation that specializes in imparting knowledge and clarifying the doubts of others," Xavier said.
"I've never heard of it before."
Emma shook her head.
"Aren't cultivation techniques all family heirlooms that can't be leaked to outsiders? Why would anyone ever impart them to an outsider? Other than in the great frontistery of Confucianism, there shouldn't be any place where anyone would impart cultivation techniques to outsiders. In any case, I've never heard of a master teacher before."
After asking a few more questions, Xavier finally came to a realization. There was no master-teacher pavilion in the 100 Schools of Philosophers realm. If one wanted to cultivate, one needed to inherit the heritage from their clan or earn the right to enter the Great Frontistery of Confucianism. The Great Frontistery of Confucianism wasn't too different from the academies on the master-teacher continent. However, the requirements to enter were extremely harsh, such that only the most talented of individuals were accepted. Even the village belle before them was unlikely to stand a chance.
"Are you trying to seek new opportunities in Newfield City? Let me tell you, it isn't as simple as that. I've been there a few times, but even I still haven't had a chance to meet any experts yet,"
Emma said as she looked at Xavier and the others with a look of pity in her eyes. Cultivation techniques were the bare necessity required for one to cultivate, but cultivation techniques were exclusive. They weren't readily available just because someone wanted one. The only reason that she managed to become a cultivator was due to her innate talent and a bunch of coincidences working in her favor. When she realized that the three of them were just trying their luck, her attitude toward them swiftly became even colder. As such, the rest of the journey ended up in silence. Roughly 2 hours later, a massive city came into sight. They had arrived at Newfeld City. The village belle had described it as an incredible city of massive proportions, but having witnessed the grandeur of the Master-Teacher continent, Xavier and the others couldn't help but shake their heads in disappointment. In terms of size, Newfeld City was nothing in comparison to the Matthews clan's Draco Tiger City or the Master-Teacher Pavilion headquarters. At the very most, it could only be said to be at the level of Olmec Royal City. There was an inspection at the entrance, but the group managed to enter the city without any hiccups. They walked down the streets before finally stopping before a massive residence. Emma pointed toward the residence and said,
"This is Ancient Sage Ivor's residence. There are plenty of people who knock on the doors in hopes of a fortuitous encounter. Look, over there. Those are the people who wish to learn their arts. However, it's a pity that they're dreaming of the impossible. No matter how long they camp out here, they won't receive anything."
Looking at the outer perimeters of the residence, there was a large group of people kneeling all around. From young children to teenagers, the kneeling group was dressed in different attires, which hinted that they had all come from far and wide. However, one thing they all had in common was the determined glint in their eyes. There were some of them who had kneeled for so long that their bodies were shaking nonstop. They were already approaching their limits, but they gritted their teeth and forced themselves to persevere. Seeing such a sight, a frown crept onto Xavier's forehead. There were so many people who desired knowledge and would go to great lengths for it, but the massive gates of the residence still remained unforgivingly sealed. It was as if their prayers would never be answered.
But Keith Cole preached the right to education. Considering that the entire 100 schools of philosophers are his descendants, why are they so unwilling to pass down their cultivation techniques?
Xavier couldn't understand what he was seeing. It was due to Keith Cole's magnanimity that he had eventually become the world's teacher. Since the lineage of the 100 schools of philosophers originated directly from Keith Cole, why would they maintain such tight control over their heritage, refusing to share it with others? While Xavier was still wondering about this matter, the massive gates to the residence suddenly opened, and several tall, slender figures walked out. They were 3 youths and a middle-aged man. The youths seemed to barely be in their 20s, whereas the middle-aged man had his brows sternly furrowed.
"A great sage cultivator,"
Seth murmured. The middle-aged man was actually a great sage cultivator, whereas the 3 youths were at Saint Level 9. Without a doubt, all 4 of them were highly talented geniuses.
"The examination for the great frontistery of Confucianism is fraught with difficulties. Take my teachings to heart, and do your best to clear it,"
the middle-aged man instructed the 3 youths in front of him.
"Yes,"
the 3 of them nodded solemnly in response.
"The great frontistery of Confucianism."
Xavier's eyebrows shot up upon hearing that familiar term.
"Current head of the Newfeld clan and his juniors. Are they going to the great frontistery of Confucianism to challenge the trial? Oh, it's incredible. Those who are permitted to step through the doorways of the great frontistery of Confucianism are the most talented of geniuses. Oh, if I could even receive just a single pointer from a person of that caliber, all of my efforts wouldn't have been in vain. It's a pity that their cultivation techniques aren't imparted to outsiders. Given our standing, there's no way we'll ever be able to lay our hands on them."
Such discussions could be heard amid the crowd. Ancient Sage Ivo's surname was Newfeld. The Newfeld clan, whom the crowd were speaking about, referred to the clan of his descendants.
"Good. I wish you all the best,"
the middle-aged man said with a wave of his hand. The 3 youths soared into the air and flitted into the distance. All it took was a few moments for them to vanish without a trace. Watching as the silhouettes of the 3 youths vanished, Seth turned to look at Xavier anxiously.
"Teacher? Yeah, let's follow them. I think that the great frontistery of Confucianism holds the key to all of the secrets that we've been wondering about so far,"
Xavier said. Previously, the experts who had snuck onto the Master-Teacher continent had all been from the 100 schools of philosophers. Instead of posing questions to the not-too-beautiful village belle, it would be much better for them to simply follow those 3 youths. Hearing their words, the village belle scoffed.
Follow them. Have you eaten the wrong medicine? They are saint experts. Given the speed that they're traveling at, even if my spirit beast flew its fastest, it'd still be unable to catch up with them. You won't be able to even see their silhouettes.
She also desired to learn from the three youths, but they simply weren't even close to being at the same level as those three. Putting aside seeking guidance from them, they wouldn't be able to reach them even if they ran with all of their might. It wasn't as if she couldn't understand Xavier and the others' agitation at seeing the three experts, but they should be realistic. They would never achieve anything great with their heads in the air. Thank you for bringing us here. We won't be riding your aerial spirit piece back. Farewell. Interrupting Emma's words, Xavier clasped his fist with a smile before turning around. He rose into the air, and as if teleporting through space, he abruptly disappeared.
It's you!
The eyes of the village belle nearly popped out of their sockets upon seeing Xavier's vanishing act. She quickly turned to look at Seth and Gia, only to see the two of them smiling at her. They vanished as well. Emma fell to the ground as she sat in a daze over what had just happened, dumbstruck. She had thought they were weaklings, but contrary to her expectations, they turned out to be experts. Top-notch experts who far surpassed her imagination. Paying no heed to the frenzied village belle, Xavier and the others hastened their flight. It didn't take them long to catch up to the three young men. While those three youths weren't able to sever space to travel through dimensional rifts, they seemed to have practiced some kind of unique movement art, allowing them to travel at an incredible speed. Shall we stop and question them? Seth asked. There's no need for that. Even if we question them, I reckon that it's unlikely they'll be able to resolve my doubts. It'll do for us to just follow them for the time being. Everything should come to light at the great frontistery of Confucianism, Xavier replied with a shake of his head. The information that Xavier wanted to know was one of the deepest secrets of the Master-Teacher continent, such that there was no way that the youths from the younger generation would know a thing. Furthermore, revealing their goals might not necessarily work to their advantage. As such, it would be best for them to trail the youths for the time being and decide on their next move after they reach the great frontistery of Confucianism. Trusting his teacher's judgment, Seth nodded before falling silent. The group continued heading forward, and 3 days later, they finally found themselves standing before a humongous mountain. The area in front of the mountain was filled with a huge crowd that numbered in the thousands. Seth discreetly landed on the ground and blended into the crowd to gather some information, whereas Xavier and Gia took this opportunity to swiftly assess their surroundings. None of those amid the crowd of several thousand around them were older than 30. All of their cultivation levels were similar to those of the three youths from before, Saint Level 9. In fact, there were some who had reached half-great sage and beyond. Other than Seth and the others, there was almost no one on the Master-Teacher continent who had reached Saint Level 9 before their 30s. Yet, for so many of them to appear there all at once. As expected of the 100 schools of philosophers, they were indeed extraordinary. They possessed the bloodlines of the ancient sages, their constitutions have been refined by the Greenspout Wheat over generations, and they've inherited the entirety of Keith Cole's heritage. Given so, it's difficult for the youths of the Master-Teacher continent to compete with them, Xavier thought. There were plenty of geniuses on the Master-Teacher continent, but even among the three great clans, most of those who were at Saint Level 9 were already in their 200s, and they were already esteemed elders in their own clans. It was spectacular for one to wield such great strength despite only being in their 20s.
Teacher, I sense a particularly sharp aura from them all.
Gia sent a telepathic message to Xavier.
It's as if they've been through countless battles. It's something that I rarely sense even from the experts of the Master-Teacher continent.
Hearing those words, Xavier nodded in response. This particular quality of those several thousand youths had caught his eye as well. Most of the experts on the Master-Teacher continent were Master Teachers. While they boasted remarkable fighting prowess, they were more skilled in imparting knowledge and guiding the later generations. On the other hand, the cultivators who had gathered in front of this mountain emanated the feral aura of the battlefield right from their bones, reminiscent of combat masters. It was apparent that they had not just focused solely on their cultivation. They had also fought many battles, granting them a deep understanding of fighting techniques. Sometime later, Seth returned and reported back to Xavier telepathically.
Teacher, based on what I've heard, the great frontistery of Confucianism isn't here. Instead, it's hidden within a folded space. If we wish to enter the great frontistery of Confucianism, we'll first have to join their ranks. Apparently, all of the people here are the descendants of the 72 sages, and they're here to take an examination.
I see. Xavier nodded contemplatively.
The examinees have to clear many trials in order to enter the peculiar folded space where the great frontistery of Confucianism is located. Otherwise, the barrier will repel them, denying them entry, Seth explained.
Hearing those words, Xavier activated his Eye of Insight to scan the surroundings, hoping to find the whereabouts of the great frontistery of Confucianism. However, he soon shook his head. He did find formations in the area around them, but there were no folded spaces or the like to be found. It seemed like he wouldn't be able to sneak into the great frontistery of Confucianism that easily.
Am I really going to have to impersonate an examinee to participate in this examination?
Xavier thought in exasperation. He was someone who wielded fighting prowess invincible beneath the dimension Shatterer realm. Even the powerful ancient sage Jericho would be no match for the current him. Yet, he was actually going to have to disguise himself as an ordinary examinee and compete with a bunch of Saint Level 9 and half-great sage cultivators. Just the notion of it felt extremely embarrassing. It was as if he was an adult marching into a playground to challenge the kids playing there. However, if he didn't do that, it would be difficult for him to get to the great frontistery of Confucianism. He had no idea about its whereabouts or how powerful the barrier around it was, so forceful methods might not work out too well. Even with his current cultivation, he dared not make a move recklessly when it came to matters relating to Keith Cole's heritage. The barrier that he had to cross in order to enter this dimension was one good example. If the great frontistery of Confucianism had something of the same caliber as well, he could very well find himself cornered even if he had Vicious's aid. Xavier pondered for a moment before turning to instruct his two students. The great frontistery of Confucianism is likely to be fraught with dangers, and your disguises aren't perfect. For the time being, you should both find a place in the vicinity and stay there until I contact you. The disguise amulet that Eva had given him would alter even his bloodline, making it impossible to discern any anomalies. With that, he should be able to impersonate one of the examinees without any issue. On the other hand, while Seth and Gia were able to alter their appearances, they weren't able to disguise their fundamentals. Under the inspection of another ancient sage, they would be exposed in an instant. Since that was the case, it would be wiser for them to stay put.
Yes, teacher.
Knowing their teacher's capabilities, the two of them nodded in response. They swiftly drafted out a plan before Seth and Gia walked away with smiles on their faces. Without much trouble, they managed to lure the other two youths of the Neufeld clan away before Xavier approached the last youth with a bright smile on his face.
Peregrine, it's a pleasure to meet you.
After following these three youths for the past 3 days, he was already well aware of their backgrounds. The youth standing before him was Peregrine Neufeld, and he was the one in the group deemed most likely to clear the examination and enter the great frontistery of Confucianism. Even though Peregrine was a descendant of ancient sage Ivo, there was no way that he could have noticed Xavier and the others' presence, given the difference in their strength. As such, he was perplexed to see that Xavier actually knew his name.
I'm aware that you may not know me, but your father is a close friend of mine. He's entrusted me to take care of you, so I'd like to have a private talk with you about the upcoming examination,
Xavier said.
You're a close friend of my father's?
A hint of doubt surfaced in Peregrine's eyes. His father was the incumbent head of the Neufeld clan, the middle-aged man who had sent them off 3 days ago. If his father had any friends here, his father would have told him about it in advance. There was no way that he would have been unaware of it.
Indeed. There are
too many people here at the moment, so shall we move to the side? Xavier could sense that Peregrine was skeptical of his identity, but he maintained a nonchalant look on his face. All right then. Peregrine was filled with doubt, but he eventually gave a nod of approval. Putting aside the fact that he was a Saint Level 9 Pinnacle expert, just the fact that they were surrounded by formidable experts made it highly unlikely for anyone to make a move on him directly, even if that person did harbor malicious intentions toward him. Besides, he was just a humble nobody. There was nothing one could get out of him. They walked over to the back of a nearby building, and Peregrine was just about to inquire about the reason behind this talk when he saw the other party's palm expanding right before his eyes. Struck directly in the face, he fainted in an instant. Right up to the moment that he fainted, he was astonished that someone actually dared to make a move on him at a place like that. Xavier placed Peregrine's body in his folded space before using the disguise amulet to alter his appearance in the form of Peregrine. He made sure that even their clothes were identical. While it hadn't been too long since he had come to this dimension, he had already grasped some rules regarding the culture there. Only those who belonged to the clans of the 72 sages were allowed to cultivate. Ordinary civilians weren't allowed to access any cultivation techniques at all. He wouldn't be allowed to take the examination if he disguised himself as a normal cultivator, so he could only wrong this fellow. Then again, this could be an opportunity for the other party. At the very least, he was sure to clear the examination without any hiccups. It was a golden ticket that guaranteed he would get into the great frontistery of Confucianism. Xavier quickly returned to where he had taken Peregrine from earlier. Soon, he saw Seth and Gia returning with the two youths that they had lured away. The two youths had confused looks on their faces, apparently not understanding why they'd been pulled away at all. Seth and Gia made up some excuse about recognizing the wrong people before taking their leave, leaving the two dumbfounded on the spot. Not too long later, several tall figures flitted over from afar, and a heavy pressure crushed down on them all. The experts from the great frontistery of Confucianism had arrived. Xavier looked at the tall figures floating in the sky with slightly raised eyebrows. Surprisingly, there were two familiar faces among the group. They were Nate and Gideon, who had paid a visit to the Natalie clan and Matthews clan respectively not too long ago. In order to preserve their lifespan, the ancient sages of the 100 schools of philosophers likely spent most of their time in hibernation. Thus, most affairs were passed down to the great sage cultivators to handle. It was apparent that those two had a rather high position in the great frontistery of Confucianism. The sempiternal realm consummation expert standing at the forefront of the group shot a sweeping gaze across the crowd before speaking with a booming voice.
Welcome. You are the most outstanding descendants from the clans of the 72 sages in this generation, and I believe that you must have put in a lot of effort in order to come this far. However, the resources that we have are limited, and I believe that I need not say anything more about the recruitment criteria of our great frontistery of Confucianism. We only open up 100 slots every year, and this year will not be an exception. This year we have a total of 2,143 applicants, which means that only 1 out of 20 of you will be able to join us. You will have to put your lives on the line in order to be the ones standing at the end of this intense battle. If you're afraid, I will allow you to step out right now.
The great frontistery of Confucianism is only accepting 100 people. Xavier frowned. The 2,000-some applicants who had gone there were all incredibly talented individuals who had reached Saint Level 9 in their 20s. On the Master Teacher continent, geniuses of this caliber would indubitably become powerhouses in the future, yet the great frontistery of Confucianism was going to eliminate so many of them at once. Was this examination not a little too strict? Noticing Xavier's bewilderment, one of the two youths beside him spoke up.
Didn't the clanhead say that before we came here? Well, the great frontistery of Confucianism's always been this strict. Besides, isn't it the same for our clan?
His name was Brennan, and while his cultivation was beneath that of Peregrine, he was also a Saint Level 9 Pinnacle cultivator. What's the same?
Well, the selections. There's an examination for us every single year, and those who fail will be denied cultivation resources and cultivation techniques, thus losing the privilege to cultivate. Have you forgotten how many battles we've gone through in order to come this far?
Brennan shook his head with a bitter smile.
How could I have possibly forgotten all of that? I just can't help but feel a little melancholic at this harshness.
Xavier replied with a slight smile to cover up his astonishment. To hold examinations every year and deprive those who had failed of their cultivation resources. Was it not a little cruel to enforce such rules within their own clans? Wasn't Keith Cole's goal to nurture every human to become powerful, independent experts? If so, why would the 100 schools of philosophers intentionally deprive their own people of the resources required for them to grow?
The examination this year is slightly different from the previous years, and it will be much simpler than before. I believe that every single one of you has noticed that the mountain in front of us has been sealed. This mountain will serve as the venue for your examination. Before entering the mountain, we'll have every single one of you wear a teleportation jade token in front of your chest. As soon as it's crushed, you'll immediately be teleported out, thus losing your right to enter into the great frontistery of Confucianism. You're free to make allies and make moves on others. There will be no restrictions on that. As long as you're one of the 100 survivors remaining at the end, you will have cleared the first examination and earned the right to enter the great frontistery of Confucianism.
The sempiternal realm consummation middle-aged man, standing at the forefront of the group above, reiterated.
We'll immediately be teleported out if the teleportation jade token we're holding is crushed? Well, that's unfair. If someone skilled in concealment hides himself as soon as we enter the mountain such that no one's able to find him, won't he be able to clear the examination without battling at all?
That's the same for those who are skilled in formations. If they set up their defenses well, no one will be able to eliminate them.
What if everyone hides and we don't eliminate each other? Such discussions sounded from the youths beneath. They had thought that the examination would take on the same format as previous years, such as a round-robin tournament or some sort of trial. But who could have known it would just be a mass elimination battle?
There's no need to worry. Since we've already set the rules, there's no way that we'll allow that sort of problem to occur. The great frontistery of Confucianism will be dispatching an enforcement squad to eliminate those who hide or proactively avoid battles. Furthermore, the duration of the examination is only 6 hours. If you're unable to reduce your numbers to 100 people by the end of this duration, we'll deem all of you to have failed the examination.
The sempiternal realm consummation middle-aged man said.
6 hours? Enforcement squad?
Everyone's eyes widened in astonishment. There were still some who had been thinking that they'd be able to exploit the rules to clear the examination with ease, but they dared not harbor such thoughts anymore. To eliminate more than 2,000 people within 6 hours was no easy feat. In order to ensure that the number was reduced to 100 people by the end of the duration, they would have to actively seek out individuals to eliminate. Furthermore, if they dared hide, they would risk being weeded out by the enforcement squad. In other words, if they wished to be one of the 100 survivors at the end, they would have to try their best to eliminate others. The sempiternal realm consummation middle-aged man looked at the crowd after explaining all of the rules.
Are there any other questions?
No, the crowd replied resoundingly. The sempiternal realm consummation middle-aged man waved his hand, and an elevated platform materialized at the center of the crowd. On it were several thousand jade tokens.
Verify your identities and claim your jade tokens,
he instructed. One of the youths took the lead and walked up to the elevated platform. He bit his finger and squeezed out a droplet of blood on the elevated platform. There was a slight buzz. With the acknowledgement of his bloodline, a jade token flew over and pinned itself to his chest, following which a second youth walked up to the elevated platform.
Their procedures sure are strict.
Seeing this, Xavier couldn't help but pat his chest in relief. It was fortunate that he had knocked out Peregrine in advance to disguise himself as the other party. If he hadn't sent Seth and Geo away, their disguises would surely have crumbled in the face of this verification method, thus putting the 100 schools of philosophers on their guard. The crowd around Xavier slowly moved toward the elevated platform, and soon enough, it was finally Xavier's turn to claim his Jade Token. He squeezed his blood on the elevated platform and successfully obtained a Jade Token too. Brennan and the other young person, Art, then went up. In less than an hour, all 2,000-some examinees had claimed their Jade Tokens that they would have to lay down their lives to protect during the course of the examination.
Good. Quickly head over to the mountain. As soon as the last participant steps onto the mountain, the 6 hours will officially start ticking down.
The sempiternal realm consummation middle-aged man in the air waved his hand grandly. The seal around the mountain opened up, and the crowd swiftly dashed toward the peak. Those who first headed in would be able to claim the advantageous terrain, thus significantly boosting their chances at clearing the examination. Brennan and Art were intending to rush in as well, but they felt someone tugging their clothes from behind. It was Peregrine.
It's likely that we'll forcefully be separated after entering the mountain. Find somewhere to hide first. I'll come looking for you.
Xavier noticed that there were teleportation formations set up along the perimeter of the mountain, so it was likely that examinees would randomly be teleported to various places on the mountain. Otherwise, if those from the same clan huddled together, it would make for an unfair battle. Hide? Brennan and Art frowned. In truth, the three of them wouldn't form too powerful a force even if they did group together. They would just become a larger target for others to attack if they huddled together, so they might very well fare better going off on their own paths.
Listen to me, and I will make sure all of us clear the examination,
Xavier said confidently. Since he had knocked out the real Peregrine and assumed the latter's identity, he should at least give something back to ancient Sage Ivo's descendants in compensation. Seeing how adamant Peregrine was about this matter, Brennan and Art hesitated for a moment before nodding in agreement.
All right, then.
Xavier didn't bother explaining how he would go looking for them after they went into hiding. Instead, with a light smile, he swiftly flitted over to the mountain. Light burst forth from the teleportation formation and shrouded his figure, causing him to vanish. When the light finally faded from view, Xavier found that he was already standing behind a boulder. As soon as he regained his balance, he felt a chilling intent moving along the ground, dashing right toward the Jade Token in front of his chest. If the strike landed, he would be eliminated right away. This examination was indeed advantageous for those who entered the mountain early. Those who had arrived earlier were already lying in ambush, waiting to spring upon those who had walked into their trap.
Not bad, you're quite fast,
Xavier chuckled as his fingers darted forward in retaliation. The weapon that was surging in his direction was held firmly on the spot, unable to advance any further on him. Even though Xavier had limited his strength to the level of a Saint Level 9 cultivator, his eye of discernment and reaction speed were more than enough to make him a match for great sage cultivators. Considering how his assailant was only an ordinary Macrocosm Ascendancy Realm cultivator, there was no way his ambush could possibly succeed. Having blocked the assault, Xavier took a good look at his assailant. It was a young man dressed in black. A hint of horror could be seen reflected in the depths of the young man's eyes upon seeing how Xavier caught his dagger so easily. Knowing that he was outmatched, the young man decisively abandoned his dagger and turned tail. It was a wise move on the young man's part. Had it been any other competitor, his decisiveness would have ensured his survival.
I have to say that you're very sharp on your feet. It's only unfortunate that you chose me as your opponent.
Xavier nodded in approval as he lifted his finger and tapped it lightly in the air. Freeze! As if the air had frozen, the young man found himself standing completely still on the spot, unable to move at all.
This is a spatial seal,
the young man cried in fright. For a Saint Level 9 cultivator to actually comprehend such an ability, this meant that the young man before him was ranked amid the top among the descendants of the 72 sages. How could he have been so unlucky as to meet such a powerful foe at the very start of the examination?
Friend, I apologize for my brash actions. I was truly foolish to have dared to make a move on you. But please be so magnanimous as to spare me.
The young man begged desperately for mercy. He boasted the greatest fighting prowess among his peers in his clan. He had thought that as long as he prepared himself well, he'd be able to hunt down others with ease. However, who could have known that his first target would end up being this ridiculously powerful expert? If only he had known earlier, he would have surely snuggled up tightly in his hiding position. He wouldn't have courted his own death.
It's not entirely impossible for me to spare you, Xavier remarked as he looked at the young man before him purposefully.
Please speak of any conditions you have for me. Understanding the intention behind Xavier's gaze, the young man gritted his teeth. I'm willing to offer up all of my possessions in exchange for your mercy. However, you should also be aware that the resources that each clan passes down to us are limited, so I don't have too many good items.
I don't need your possessions. You have two choices in front of you. You can either have your Jade token destroyed and be eliminated, or you can tell me what I want to know, Xavier said as he gazed deeply at the young man. Rest assured, I won't probe into the secrets of your clan and put you in a tight spot.
I choose the second, the young man replied decisively. Only he knew how much effort he had put in to get this far. If he failed to get into the great frontistery of Confucianism, all of the resources that he had been entitled to would come to a halt, making it impossible for him to advance any further in the future. No matter what, he couldn't allow himself to be eliminated there.
Wonderful, Xavier remarked nonchalantly as he placed his hands behind his back. From the moment you started cultivating, how did you climb to the current stage that you're at? I want you to describe every single thing in detail, be it the trials or examinations you've been through.
Huh? The young man had been wondering what Xavier would ask him, but it turned out to be something that practically everyone knew about. Even though he was bewildered by the question, he still answered it honestly.
I've been through 27 exams so far, roughly 1 or 2 every single year. In every single examination, I saw many of my peers getting eliminated, thus having whatever resources they'd been entitled to completely cut off. Instead, they're entrusted with the responsibilities of managing the clan's businesses instead.
It didn't take long for the young man to go through his entire story. As Xavier listened to the young man, a frown slowly etched its way between his brows. Just as he had guessed, it seemed like competition was an integral part of the life of the 100 schools of philosophers. From the moment they started cultivating, they were put through trial after trial. They would be entitled to more cultivation techniques and resources if they cleared the trials, but if they failed, they would be stripped of their right to cultivate. This was no longer nurturing the young. It was practically nurturing poisonous goo. It was rumored that those who nurtured goo would toss thousands of poisonous creatures together into a space and have them kill one another. The one to emerge victorious at the end of it would produce the strongest poisonous goo of all. This seemed to be the same method that the 100 schools of philosophers were employing on their youth as well. Those who were given the opportunity to participate in the examination of the great frontistery of Confucianism had to go through many trials and rise above all of their peers in order to come this far. It was no wonder all of them emanated such feral auras reminiscent of the combat masters. Only those who had the most tenacious drive of all could possibly survive under such conditions. Perhaps this was also why Ezra and the others had no qualms about collaborating with the otherworldly demons. To them, results were the most important of all. As long as they achieved what they aimed for, the means weren't important. It seems like the 100 schools of philosophers have created an environment that promotes the survival of the fittest, Xavier thought as he looked at the young man once more. You said earlier that the resources that you're given from your clan is limited. What does that mean? As an offspring of a major clan, do you not know that? The young man asked incredulously. However, knowing that his future was in the other party's hands, he could only answer obediently. Depending on one's level of cultivation and The examinations one's passed, the amount of resources that one's entitled to is fixed. Based on what I know, it's the same for all clans. There's no exception at all. Xavier gasped in shock. It felt like he had suddenly gotten a major glimpse into how the 100 schools of philosophers operated. At the very start, they would choose the offspring that showed some aptitude toward cultivation and train them. At fixed intervals, those who failed to advance beyond a certain level would be eliminated, thus losing their right to access cultivation resources and cultivation techniques. Other than that, there would also be all kinds of competitions and trials that they would have to overcome. If they wished to continue cultivating, the only thing they could do was charge ahead as desperately as they could in order to ensure that they wouldn't lag behind. It could be said that the resources in this world were controlled to a degree so precise that it could make one shudder in fear. Can't one venture into ancient domains or the like in order to obtain cultivation resources and techniques? Xavier asked. Most cultivators on the Master-Teacher continent didn't have too many resources either. However, through trading or venturing into ancient domains and finding treasures, they would be able to gather the resources required for them to continue cultivating for quite a while. So, why could the population here not do the same? There was no way that they hadn't thought of such a thing. How could there be any ancient domains around? Also, after a cultivator dies, all of the resources that they've been given are taken back by their respective clan. Even if you kill me right now, you won't be able to take my resources because every single item that I've brought with me has been logged in my clan's logistic records. If there's anything missing, my clan will make an official visit to your clan and demand the return of the missing resources, the young man said. Xavier's eyebrows shot up in disbelief. Just what in the world was the 100 schools of philosophers up to? Why in the world would they go to such extreme lengths to control the circulation of resources in the Cax domain? Was this dimension in dire shortage of resources? After asking a few more questions to clarify the matter, Xavier flicked his finger lightly at the young man. He collapsed to the ground. You'll regain your consciousness after I leave, but you won't remember meeting me and everything that's happened afterward, Xavier whispered softly before leaving the area. Memories were stored in the soul, and given Xavier's prowess in soul arts, it wasn't too difficult for him to isolate a specific memory and wipe it away. Even though the questions that he had asked were insignificant in nature, it was likely that it could bring some trouble to Peregrine in the future. Since that was the case, he should stem any potential problems at the roots. Spiritual perception. After parting from the young man, Xavier walked a distance away before releasing his spiritual perception. In an instant, he gained an overview of the entire mountain. In truth, there were formations in place that prevented the examinees from using their spiritual perception. However, by exploiting the flaws of those formations and his superior strength, he was able to use his without catching anyone's notice. Soon, he found the trails of the two youths that he was looking for. Oh, Bren is quite lucky, isn't he? He was teleported into the midst of a mountain stream, so as long as he hides there, he should be able to avoid the attention of others for quite some time. Oh, hey. Did Brennan take up all of the luck? The three examinees from ancient sage Ivo's lineage were Peregrine, Brennan, and Art. Brennan had managed to hide himself well, so no one had noticed him thus far. On the other hand, Art was in a precarious position. There were three powerful candidates chasing after him. It was fortunate that Art was extremely nimble, or else his jade token would have already been shattered. Thus, Xavier began flitting in the direction of Art. He knew that there was an enforcement squad constantly keeping track of their movements, so he made sure to maintain his speed at Saint Level 9 Pinnacle. While he was traveling, he could sense shockwaves rippling all around him. The competition among the examinees was really not to be underestimated. It was no exaggeration to say that multiple battles had been ongoing every second since the start of the examination, and the examinees were swiftly being eliminated one after another. The examination of the great frontistery of Confucianism was truly cruel. It was true that the rules permitted the examinees to form alliances,
But in the face of limited slots, all alliances were transient. The moment a person lowered their guard, a dagger would be plunged into their back. From the start of the examination, Xavier had already caught sight of such occurrences several times. 3 examinees were working in coordination with one another to corner a cultivator traveling alone. But in the midst of that battle, one of the 3 examinees working together let his guard down for a moment and ended up getting injured. At the end of the battle, his teammate suddenly turned against him and eliminated him as well. In this examination, sustaining injuries was extremely dangerous. Not only did it cause a decline in one's fighting prowess, but it was also a sign of weakness for other examinees to exploit. As such, being in an alliance might not necessarily be a good thing for this examination. While Xavier was dashing ahead, Art was trembling non-stop as cold sweat trickled down his face. Under the simultaneous assault of the 3 examinees, he'd already sustained significant injuries. With half of his energy expended, exhaustion was starting to seep into his body.
Why struggle so hard? Just obediently accept your elimination and all of your suffering will be over. You should have known from the start that the great frontistery of Confucianism isn't a place that someone of your caliber could possibly enter. One of the youths scoffed with the confidence of a hunter cornering prey. The other 2 youths behind him encircled Art in a fan-shaped formation.
Do your best to eliminate me, then. Even if I can't enter the great frontistery of Confucianism, I'll make sure to bring you down together with me.
Knowing that there was no escape for him, Art gritted his teeth furiously as he glared at the trio before him. His luck was really horrible. As soon as he entered the mountain, he'd been teleported right into the middle of these 3. It had really taken his all to survive for so long. Oh, you're going to bring us down together with you. That must be the greatest joke of the century. The youth leading the team of 3 harumphed disdainfully. Get him! Hearing the signal to attack, the 3 of them dashed forward and rained blows down upon Art. Their attacks covered all directions, making it impossible for the latter to escape. The youth leading the team had already reached half Great Sage, whereas the other 2 were at Saint Level 9 Pinnacle. Art would have struggled against any one of them, let alone the 3 of them simultaneously. He flew into a fluster right from the start. A powerful blow sent him crashing heavily into a boulder behind him. Completely sapped, his body slumped to the ground like a pile of loose mud. Seeing that Art was already powerless to retaliate, the youth leading the team told the other 2 youths beside him, "Let's not waste any more time. Quickly, crush his jade token and we'll start finding our next prey." Yes. The youth on the left chuckled softly as he leaped up to Art and darted his finger toward the jade token in front of the latter's chest. If the attack landed, there was no doubt that Art would be eliminated.
It seems like I'm going to have to let down the expectations of the clan.
With a despaired look on his face, Art knew that there was no way he'd be able to make a comeback. Thus, he closed his eyes helplessly and accepted his fate. However, as time ticked by, the jade token in front of his chest failed to shatter. Opening his eyes once more, he saw a figure sitting on a boulder not too far away. That figure was shaking his right leg casually as he looked in their direction with a trace of a smile on his face.
Are the 3 of you proud of yourselves for ganging up on my friend? Peregrine?
Art's heart jolted upon hearing that voice. It was none other than the son of the clan head, Peregrine. The other party had arrived at this crucial moment to save him.
Another person who's come to court his death, huh?
Seeing how the newly arrived young man dared to provoke them, the youth leading the team sneered coldly. He gestured at the other 2 with a tilt of his chin, and they swiftly surrounded Xavier.
You should see for yourself how proud we are of ourselves.
Knowing that time was precious, such that every single second that they remained in the open would spell a greater risk for them, the 3 of them charged right at Xavier. Seeing that the 3 of them had turned their sights to the son of the clan head, Art exclaimed in a panic,
Peregrine, hurry up and run away! At the very least, one of us has to clear this examination. You don't have to care about me. He knew that Peregrine was only slightly stronger than him, so there was no chance that the latter could defeat the three standing before him. Rather than getting eliminated just like that, the latter would be better off escaping. At the very least, there would still be a ray of hope for their lineage. However, before Art could finish his words, the sound of fists and kicks plunging into flesh echoed resoundingly in the air. Watching as everything unfolded before his eyes, the words that he had sought to say suddenly caught in his throat, causing his words to come to an abrupt halt. Contrary to expectations, the trio, who had still been standing smugly a moment ago, were floored with horror reflected in their eyes. Meanwhile, Peregrine was still sitting on the boulder, not seeming to have moved at all. The other party looked at him with an encouraging smile and said, "You should eliminate them yourself." "Me?" Art was taken aback by those words. Up till this moment, he'd been unable to make sense of how the Peregrine that he knew was able to defeat those three so easily. His mind was so caught up in that matter that he was unable to process anything else. "Weren't they trying to eliminate you a moment ago? Well, since that's the case, it's only right for you to return the favor to them," Xavier replied. It was already an act of bullying for him to make a move on those three. He would feel too ashamed of himself if he really eliminated them on top of that. No matter what, he still wanted to retain as much of his dignity as possible. But I'm not a match for them!" Art cried with a reddened face. While the three of them had sustained injuries in the earlier clash with Peregrine, his injuries were not light either. As much as he wanted to eliminate the three of them, he knew that the current him didn't have the ability to do so. "Rest assured, these three lads are nothing at all. Follow my instructions and you'll be able to defeat them with ease," Xavier replied encouragingly. "Defeat them with ease? Me?" Art was a little hesitant, but it seemed like the idea had struck a chord in his heart. He gritted his teeth and replied, "All right, I'll give it a try." In any case, Peregrine was already there, and based on the current situation, it seemed like he was already in a safe position. Thus, there was nothing for him to worry about, even if he did lose the battle. "You aren't going to make a move?" The youth leading the team eyed Xavier warily with fear in his eyes. The other party had defeated the three of them in a single move. In terms of strength, there was probably no one who could stand against him among the younger generation. Fighting against such an opponent would surely spell their defeat. However, if their opponent was just the fellow whom they had chased earlier, it shouldn't be too difficult for them to claim victory. "I won't make a move, so feel free to use whatever you have at your disposal. If you're able to defeat him, I'll let the three of you go. Otherwise, I guess the three of you will just have to end your cultivation journey here," Xavier replied coolly. Hearing those words, Art nearly keeled over. "Peregrine, are you out of your mind?" Art had thought that Peregrine was trying to train him, and if he reached his limits, the other party would step in and save him. Yet, contrary to his expectations, Peregrine was actually saying that he wouldn't interfere in the fight, and he would even let the three of them off if they could defeat him. How in the world could he possibly defeat the three of them together in a real fight? It would already be a blessing if he wasn't beaten to death. He had thought that Peregrine was here to save him, but it felt like the latter had just dug a humongous pit for him to leap into. With a conflicted look, Art seemed as if he was on the verge of tears. Seeing the "this is the end" look on Art's face, Xavier couldn't help but chuckle. "Cut your hesitation and just do as I say. As long as you follow my instructions, you'll surely be able to win the battle. Otherwise, don't blame me for not helping you if you get eliminated." It would take a miracle for Art to lose as long as the other party heeded his guidance. All right, then." Seeing that Peregrine wasn't joking around, Art cursed the other party countless times in his heart before taking in a deep breath and rising to his feet somberly. The worst that could happen was his elimination anyway.
He would just have to make sure to recount everything that had happened to his clan head when he returned. On the other hand, the group of 3 had realized the disparity between their strength and Xavier's, and they knew that it would be impossible to escape from the other party. Thus, they just exchanged glances before turning to glare at Art coldly. The 3 of them made a move simultaneously, raising powerful gales in the area. 6 arms flashed across the air swiftly in the blink of an eye. Every single one of these arms carried the devastating might of lightning, sealing off every possible path that Art could possibly escape to.
Is this the end?
Art felt his blood turning cold. Previously, he had thought that the worst that could happen was for him to sustain severe injuries, but from the looks of it, even surviving would be a luxury. Just when he was about to resolve himself to his death, a voice suddenly echoed in his mind. "Follow my orders. Use the 3rd form of the Paste Gate movement technique, together with the 5th move of the Enlightenment Palm and the 2nd form of the 7-Aperture Fist." Art immediately recognized that voice to be Peregrine's. While he had no idea why the other party wanted him to execute those moves, he knew that he had no other choice but to follow the other party's instructions at this point in time. Thus, he gritted his teeth as he thought, "I'll pit my life against them." To be able to survive the harsh trials of the Newfeld clan and advance so far, step by step, the tenacity that drove him wasn't something that ordinary people could possibly imagine. All it took was the blink of an eye for his heart to settle down. He swiftly went through the 3 battle techniques in his mind before his body moved fluidly to execute them like flowing water. The 3rd form of the Paste Gate movement technique brought him into the blind spot of the coordination of the trio, and executing the Enlightenment Palm with his left palm and the 7-Aperture Fist with his right fist, he struck the chest of 2 of the youths. The jade token in front of their chests shattered, and with looks of disbelief on their faces, they were swallowed by an outburst of light and vanished. Art was taken aback by what he had just done. He lowered his gaze to look at his hands in bewilderment, almost as if he were staring at a monster. Following Peregrine's orders had actually allowed him to overcome the encirclement in a single breath, and he had even managed to eliminate 2 of them so easily. When in the world had he become so formidable?
You...
Seeing how 2 of his comrades had vanished in an instant, the youth leading the group backed away with a fearful look on his face. Be it in terms of the sharpness of the movements, the grasp of timing, or his reaction speed, Art's earlier maneuver was so ingenious that it almost felt like an art form. If not, there was no way the other party could have eliminated 2 of them within such a short period of time. This was a remarkable feat that he knew he would never be able to pull off in his current state. Just 10 breaths ago, Art had been in their grasp, but in the blink of an eye, the tables had turned on them. Was this all because he was following that young man's instructions? The youth couldn't help but turn to look at the young man sitting on the boulder not too far away, as shock crashed down on his mind like a roaring tsunami. Seemingly, even a casual pointer from him was able to induce such a massive improvement in Art within a short period of time. Just how freaking powerful must that young man be? "Eliminate him too," Xavier instructed. Yes! If Art had still harbored some doubts before, at that very moment there was nothing but admiration left at the bottom of his heart. He charged forward and thrust his palm down on the final remaining youth. Just like that, the 2 of them started exchanging blows with one another. This time, Xavier did not give direct instructions to Art. Instead, what he did was decipher the other party's moves in detail to the latter, granting Art the freedom to choose what kind of moves he should use to counterattack. Initially, Art's movements were still a little flustered as his thoughts struggled to keep up with the flow of the battle. However, by the 20th blow, he had already grown accustomed to the tempo, and before long, he was able to fend off the other party's attacks with minimal effort. The youth who had cornered him earlier was no longer a match for him. With a powerful thrust of his finger, Art shattered the youth's jade token. He saw an indignant look on the youth's face before the latter's silhouette was completely enveloped within a brilliant outburst of light, and vanished from view.
Peregrine!
Art could hardly believe that he had actually managed to defeat a half-great sage cultivator with his own strength. He turned to look at Peregrine with awe in his eyes. No wonder Peregrine had told them to wait for him to come to look for them. Who could have known that he would have grown so powerful over the course of a few days? Just as Art was about to express his gratitude to the young man sitting on the boulder, the other party suddenly turned to look at the mountain stream not too far away and waved his hand leisurely.
Haven't you all watched long enough? Don't you think it's about time for you to come out?
Resounding applause echoed in the area as 7 silhouettes emerged from the shadows of the mountain stream. Upon seeing this sight, Art's heart skipped a beat. He had actually failed to realize that there were so many people hiding in the vicinity. Furthermore, from the looks of it, they were already allied with one another. It suddenly dawned on him why Peregrine had not made a move all along. It was likely that the other party had noticed that there were others hiding in the area, so he was keeping a close eye on them in case they made a move.
I have to say, Peregrine, you sure have improved quite a lot from back then. It seems like you were actually able to allow this ordinary fellow to defeat 3 men simultaneously with just a couple of pointers. With your current strength, you're qualified to join my team.
The white-robed young man standing at the forefront of the 7 youths said. He was also the one who had applauded earlier.
He's a descendant of ancient sage Marcellus, Ira.
Upon taking a closer look at the white-robed young man's appearance, Art suddenly felt as if someone had gripped his heart tightly.
He's the strongest person in this entire examination. There's no one on this mountain who's a match for him.
Most clans would make sure to gather some intelligence about the examinees challenging the great frontistery of Confucianism's examination each year, so that their own people would have a clearer idea who their competitors were. If there was anyone among the 2,000-some examinees whom everyone hoped to avoid, it was none other than the white-robed young man standing before them, Ira. Ancient sage Marcellus was the first senior of Keith Cole's 72 sages, such that even ancient sage Merrill, who boasted the greatest fighting prowess of them all, dared not go against his words. And the person standing before them, Ira, was ancient sage Marcellus's descendant. Due to the incredible capabilities that he wielded, Ira's fame had reached even the ears of the older generations. It was truly the worst of luck for them to encounter him here.
You want me to join your team?
Xavier didn't appear to be astonished in the least by this turn of events. He simply looked at Ira with casual nonchalance in his eyes, seemingly unfazed by Ira's appearance and his offer.
Indeed, those behind me are those whom I've acknowledged, and you have also caught my eye. Join my team, and let's eliminate the other examinees together.
Ira placed his hands behind his back and spoke with a light chuckle. His voice carried a domineering edge that left no room for negotiation at all.
Pardon me, but the notion of me catching your eye sends shudders down my spine, and I'm not interested in joining your team.
Xavier declined curtly. He didn't expect the other party to be so narcissistic, so he couldn't be bothered to put up a front to gently reject the other party. Seeing the airs that Xavier was putting on, one of the youths standing behind Ira couldn't stand it any longer and furiously bellowed,
"It's your honor that Brother Ira invited you to join our group, you arrogant brat. Don't you think that you're something huge just because you aren't utterly useless? As long as we wish to, we can eliminate you right now and strip you of your opportunity to continue cultivating."
Connor had already reached St. Level 9 Pinnacle a year ago. With his abilities, he was confident that he'd be able to clear the examination of the great frontistery of Confucianism with ease. But contrary to his expectations, the format chosen for this year turned out to be a free-for-all elimination round. If it had been the usual round-robin tournament, he was certain that he could have gotten into the top 100. However, when it came to a free-for-all elimination, there were simply too many variables involved for him to guarantee his victory. Nevertheless, he felt that it shouldn't be too difficult for him to get into the final 100 survivors as long as he moved carefully. Unfortunately, it seemed like Lady Luck was not on his side. Shortly after he entered the examination grounds, he encountered the strongest competitor in the entire examination, Ira. Before he knew it, he'd already been eliminated. At the perimeter of the mountain, one of the middle-aged men who'd been standing with Nate earlier walked up to Connor and said,
Ira is the strongest expert in this examination. You need not feel too bad about losing to him.
He was from the lineage of ancient sage Torin, Rafferty. All of those who had been eliminated would be teleported right to this location. In order to ensure that everything proceeded smoothly, the scholastic masters of the great frontistery of Confucianism were able to peer into whatever was happening within the mountain in real time.
I know that losing to him was inevitable, but I feel so indignant.
Connor clenched his fists tightly in frustration. He knew that there was no way that he could have triumphed over Ira. The disparity in their strength was simply too great. Nevertheless, it was still an awful feeling to be eliminated as soon as he stepped into the examination grounds.
Ira is Ezra's younger brother, and he's received the latter's guidance. Of the 2,000 examinees gathered here, there are some who've reached great size level 1 introspective convalescence realm, but even they'd face difficulty dealing with him, let alone you.
Scholastic Master Rafferty consoled with a smile.
If nothing goes wrong, it's likely that he will emerge with the highest results in this examination, and
ensuring that one was able to squeeze into the ranks of the last 100 survivors was just the prerequisite to entering the great frontistery of Confucianism. As for the ranking of the last 100 survivors, it would be determined by how many people they had eliminated over the course of the examination. Ira's fighting prowess could be said to be unrivaled among the 2,000-some examinees, and, to make matters worse, he had teamed up with 6 other top-notch experts. Anyone who was unlucky enough to encounter his team was bound to be eliminated. There was no other way around it.
Aye, ancient sage Marcellus's lineage has always produced generation after generation of experts. I guess this isn't something that can be helped.
As much as Connor was unwilling to face his own defeat, he had no choice but to grudgingly accept it. All of a sudden, there was a radiant burst of light in front of Connor. A silhouette crashed onto the ground not too far away. Seeing the fellow who had just been teleported there, Connor widened his eyes in astonishment.
Isn't that Bill? He was on Ira's team, right? After all, he was the one who eliminated me earlier.
As one of the 7 people on Ira's team, how in the world did he get eliminated? Who in the world would dare make a move on Ira's team? Or could it be an internal conflict? In his moment of shock, a blur flashed across Ira's eyes as another silhouette fell to the ground. He was also from Ira's team. Following which, another 4 people fell to the ground with awkward looks on their faces.
Aren't all of them?
Connor was stunned by what he was seeing. They were all familiar faces. They had all been with Ira when he was eliminated earlier on. How in the world did all of them get eliminated one after another in quick succession? Did Ira make a move on them? Or did they encounter some kind of formidable expert? Unable to curb his intrigue, Connor rushed forward and asked,
You lot, what?
But before he could finish his words, another person fell to the ground. When Connor got a close look at that other party's appearance, he froze on the spot, petrified. Even Rafferty staggered weakly and nearly tripped over his own legs. The person who had just been eliminated was none other than the examinee whom he had just confidently declared would be the champion of this examination, Ira. Ira struggled up from the ground as he glared at the mountain peak with infernos blazing in his eyes. Unable to suppress the fury burning in his chest, he roared,
Peregrine, this isn't over yet.
This was the worst humiliation he had ever suffered. He was an introspective convalescence realm expert, and many viewed him as the strongest contender for the champion seat. He had thought that it was finally time for him to showcase his prowess and dominate the examination. But who could have known that Peregrine Neufeld would grab him by his neck and throw him out, as if dealing with a little chick?
To make things worse, he found himself completely unable to retaliate. This was a stain that he would never be able to wash away in his life. He quickly looked around him, and upon seeing Scholastic Master Rafferty, he walked up to the ladder, clasped his fist, and reported, "Master Rafferty, I suspect that Peregrine from ancient Sage Ivo's lineage is cheating. I implore the enforcement squad to head over and investigate him." "Cheating?" Ira clenched his jaw and spat. "That's right. I met Peregrine half a year ago, and while he wasn't weak, he was still nowhere close to being a match for me back then. Yet he actually just now managed to defeat me with the utmost ease." "I see," Scholastic Master Rafferty nodded. "I'll inform the enforcement squad to investigate the matter." He had no idea how Peregrine could be cheating, but since someone had reported the claim, not to mention that the someone was the strongest contender for the champion seat, it was his responsibility to at least look into the matter. Thus, he took out his communication jade token and passed down a series of instructions, following which he turned his gaze back to Ira and reassured him. "Now don't worry, if Peregrine is truly cheating, we'll surely be able to find something. We have eyes all over the mountain, so there's nothing that he can do that can escape our notice." Given the significance of this examination, cheating was strictly prohibited. Of course, if Peregrine had truly defeated Ira with his own strength, there was nothing that could be done. Ira heaved a sigh of relief. "You mentioned earlier that you were eliminated by Peregrine, right? May I ask how many people he's rallied to his side to be able to defeat so many of you at once?" Scholastic Master Rafferty asked. In his view, it was likely that Peregrine had managed to gather many experts to his side. After all, such actions were explicitly mentioned to be allowed in the examination. If that wasn't the case, it meant that Peregrine had single-handedly overcome the collaboration of all 7 of them, which was, of course, a ridiculous notion. Even Great Sage Level 2 experts would be unable to pull something like that off. That question jolted Ira's memory of what had happened earlier, and his cheeks began twitching intensely. He was alone. There was another person that was with him, but that person didn't make a move at all. "Are you telling me that he single-handedly defeated all of you?" Scholastic Master Rafferty was dumbstruck. "Was it a one-on-one?" "No, that's not it. We attacked him together in order to save time." Ira's face turned even redder. It was in view of the prowess that Peregrine had displayed that he wanted to invite the other party onto his team. Yet the other party had simply snubbed his invitation, and that had really infuriated him. Thus, he had ordered the entire team to attack Peregrine together. Who would have thought that despite the experts that he had rallied to his side, none of them were able to withstand even a single blow from Peregrine Neufeld? "So, despite challenging him as a team, you all still ended up getting eliminated by him alone?" Scholastic Master Rafferty widened his eyes, unable to believe what he had just heard. Ira was reluctant to say it out loud, so he nodded discreetly in response. Scholastic Master Rafferty was so shocked that he couldn't even close his mouth anymore. To be able to defeat so many experts single-handedly. Could it be that Peregrine's cultivation had already reached Great Sage Level 2 Aureate Body Realm? But it shouldn't be possible for anyone to reach that cultivation realm prior to entering the Great Frontistery of Confucianism. Shocked, Scholastic Master Rafferty was about to probe deeper when there was another burst of light, and another group of fellows rained onto the ground. "It's the enforcement squad. Isn't the enforcement squad supposed to eliminate others? How did they end up being eliminated themselves?" Connor, Ira, and the others felt lightheaded. It was just a moment ago that the enforcement squad had been dispatched to investigate Peregrine, but who could have predicted that all of them would end up being ejected from the mountain? "What in the world happened? You don't have any jade tokens, so it shouldn't be possible for you to be eliminated," Scholastic Master Rafferty exclaimed. The head of the enforcement squad struggled to his feet as he explained, "Peregrine captured us and set up a teleportation formation to send us out.
He set up a teleportation formation and sent you all out.
Everyone was stunned. Meanwhile, on the mountain, Xavier turned around to look at the dazed Art and said,
Let's go and find Brennan.
Art felt as if he was dreaming. Peregrine had always been stronger than him, but it was only by a small degree. Yet within just a few moments, not only did he witness the other party defeating Ira and his team with ease, he even saw the other party tossing the enforcement squad members who had approached them to investigate that matter off of the mountain one after another. This was way too extreme. "Snap out of it, Art! Someone's blocking our way!" Peregrine's voice suddenly sounded in his ear. Raising his gaze, he saw two young men standing in their way. "I won't be making another move. Try doing what I told you earlier," Xavier instructed.
Yes.
Knowing that this was a good opportunity for him to temper himself, Art gritted his teeth and dashed forward. When he was fighting with the head of the three youths earlier, Peregrine's words had inadvertently given him quite a few insights regarding his own battle style. Putting them into practice now, he found that his movements felt much more natural than before, and he was in a far better position to deal with whatever was thrown his way. It didn't take long before he eliminated those two youths standing in their path.
The pointers that you gave me have really enhanced my fighting prowess.
Watching as the two youths were teleported away, Art couldn't stop trembling. Had it been in the past, he would have struggled to eliminate even one of them. Yet he found that he was able to deflect every single one of their blows with ease and launch decisive counterattacks to take down the two of them swiftly. When he turned to look at Peregrine once more, what was in his eyes was no longer awe, but reverence. Seeing that the young man from the Neufeld clan had acquired some knowledge from the earlier battle, Xavier added, "Practical battle is the best way for one to improve. It's true that the rules of this free-for-all elimination examination are filled with flaws, but it is able to trigger one's desperation and stimulate the growth of the examinees, making them more confident than before. When faced with a problem, the first reaction you should have isn't how you can get away from it, but how you can deal with it." There was no denying that luck played a heavy part in such a free-for-all elimination examination. If one encountered the strongest contender at the start of the exam, one could very well be eliminated there and then. Furthermore, the examinees were allowed to form alliances, which meant that the final 100 would likely not be the strongest of the group. But so what? Those who persevered through the examination would surely enjoy a huge boost in confidence, and their cultivation would advance faster and faster from then on. If two individuals were similar in talent, what would make the difference between them were their state of mind and encounters in life. After defeating quite a few opponents, Art had become much more confident than before, too. Just as the other party had said, his first reaction in the face of meeting an opponent was how he could get away and ensure his survival. However, the thought that was dominating his mind at the moment was instead how he could best eliminate his opponent. This change in attitude would make all the difference in Art's future progress as a cultivator. Seeing that Art received his message, Xavier nodded with a smile. Offense is often the best defense. As expected of a genius of the 100 schools of philosophers, the other party's intelligence was indeed far above that of the master teachers whom he'd taught before. Of course, the other party was still a long way off from matching his direct disciples. While making their way over to Brennan, Xavier continued offering pointers to Art. He knew that Brennan wasn't in any danger from the scan of his spiritual perception, so he was in no rush at all. Along the way, the examinees whom they met would be eliminated without fail, and those battles further tempered Art's fighting skills. He became more and more confident. An hour later, they finally arrived in the forested area beside the mountain stream where Brennan had chosen to hide himself. The current Brennan seemed to have run out of his luck. He had been discovered by a group of examinees. Individually, those examinees were weaker than him, but with their strength combined, they formed a force exceeding what Brennan could deal with. Cold sweat dripped down his face as he anxiously assessed the group before him.
Just when he was reaching his limits, he caught sight of Peregrine and Art in his peripheral vision, and his eyes lit up in relief.
Oi, over here!
He had thought that the two of them would rush over to help him deal with the lot surrounding him, but contrary to what he thought, the two of them stopped at the edge of the forest. He saw Peregrine pointing at him and saying,
"Did you see that? A single move is all it takes for the tide of battle to turn against you." "You're right. Brennan really should have thought it through before making that move earlier."
Art nodded in agreement. Just a moment ago, he'd been equals with Brennan. Who could have known that in a short hour, the other party would end up becoming so weak?
"If you were in his place, what would you have done?"
Xavier asked. As much as this was an examination, this was also a trial to test Art.
"I would use the third move of the Shallow Water Fist, accompanied with the Spirit Leaf movement technique,"
Art replied without much hesitation.
"The Shallow Water Fist emulates the essence of catching a fish in shallow waters. It requires you to have a deep understanding of your opponent in order to ensure its success. However, just as you're able to see your opponent's move, your opponent is able to see your move as well. Furthermore, the complex movements of the Spirit Leaf movement technique would just make it harder for you to control your Shallow Water Fist."
Xavier shook his head.
You're right. I was so focused on dealing with the opponent's attack that I forgot about the flaws of the Shallow Water Fist. It would indeed be a poor choice to pair it with the Spirit Leaf movement technique. Coordinating it with the Emerald Ripple Palm should work out much better. If that was the case, I'd be able to deal with the two of them within 7 blows, and the remaining 2 in 5 more.
Art analyzed contemplatively. Xavier nodded in response. Through his pointers and a series of practical battles, Art had indeed made major improvements in his fighting techniques. He was already able to reflect on and correct his own mistakes. While the two of them were engaged in an intense discussion, Brennan was on the verge of wailing.
"What shallow water palm and Spirit Leaf movement technique? Shallow your head! Can't you two talk later? Don't you see that I'm on the verge of being pummeled to death?"
While moving in a fluster, Brennan sustained 2 more hits to his eyes, causing them to swell up. He had thought that this should be enough to convince the two of them to rush right in to help him, but their discussion simply droned on.
While that strike to the face will induce temporary blindness and vertigo in the opponent, such attacks are rarely able to land squarely, especially given that the head is one of the vitals that a cultivator should protect at all costs. If you were in his place, where would you strike? I think I would strike their ankles. Well, that fellow harnesses great strength in his body, so if I strike his ankles, I should be able to affect his balance and throw him off guard. And even if my attack failed to land, I'd be able to divert his attention away, thus creating an opportunity for me to strike his Jade Token. Indeed, this isn't a life-and-death battle, but an elimination round. The Jade Token should always be the main focus of one's attacks.
Brennan sustained 2 more punches to his face, causing fresh blood to trickle from his lips.
What about that punch? Well, that punch was executed a little awkwardly, but it struck an ideal position. It successfully induced a momentary daze in the opponent. If I were in his place, I would have struck the mouth and sent out a sweeping kick right after. This way I'd be able to overwhelm my enemy, and the Jade Token would be exposed for an instant. Well, it's not a bad idea on your part to perform a sweeping kick, but you neglected the limitations of your own body. Due to the cultivation technique you practice, your gleam wouldn't be able to flow fast enough to your lower body to conduct a powerful lower kick. If you executed a weak or delayed sweeping kick, it would instead leave you open for a moment. You're right. What should I do then? Think about it. Should I try to attack the Jade Token with my left hand instead? Of course not. There'd only be a 30% chance of success if you struck the Jade Token with your left hand, and there's a good chance that you might even be counterattacked.
Xavier frowned in displeasure. It was just a moment ago that he thought that the other party was a quick learner, but all of his expectations fell through the next moment. Having 2 of the countermeasures that he had proposed refuted, Art fell into a state of confusion.
What should I do, then? What else can you do?
Xavier spat lividly.
Of course it's to continue hitting his face. Since you've claimed the upper hand, as long as you continue your offense, you'll be able to dominate the flow of battle, thus putting your enemy in a passive position.
As soon as those words were spoken, Brennan sustained several more punches to his face.
Look, even he's got it.
Xavier exclaimed in exasperation. Brennan nearly burst into tears.
Oh, I see.
Seeing how Brennan was struck to the point where he was completely astonished, possibly forgetting even his own name, Art's eyes lit up as he nodded. Peregrine was indeed an amazing person. He had seen through the crux in an instant. If it had been him, not only would his attacks have failed, the other party might have even been able to turn the tables on him. However, with just a couple more punches, the other party would be completely incapacitated, thus sealing the outcome of the battle. While it required more moves, there was no denying that this was a much safer option. Perhaps it might even be the most efficient way to end the battle.
Do you think that it's impossible for him to counterattack just because he's been struck in his face several times consecutively?
Xavier suddenly asked.
Is it still possible to make a comeback after that? I'm afraid that I don't really know how I'd cope with such a situation.
Art replied in embarrassment. Had he been in Brennan's place, those few punches would have surely destroyed him. He would have lost his cool and possibly lost the battle too. Hit a person, but not their face. This was a common saying among the populace. It was considered a huge humiliation to have one's face struck.
Situations where you don't know how to retaliate often contain the greatest opportunity to turn the tables. Since the enemies have been focusing their attacks on his face, they're bound to be open elsewhere, like the chest or the crotch,
Xavier said. Art widened his eyes in realization.
Indeed, in a battle, the head is the most protected area. In order to land consecutive hits on the head, it's inevitable that one will have to get into extremely close quarters with the other party, and at a moment like that, striking elsewhere could achieve unexpected results.
While they were still speaking, Brennan was still getting struck in his head. He could almost see stars spinning around him.
I can't count on those two bastards to save me.
Seeing how those two were engrossed in their discussion, showing not a sliver of desire to save him, Brennan wiped the tears from his eyes. He had thought that he would be saved by the arrival of his comrades, but it felt like things had only gotten worse with their arrival. That being said, there was some logic to what they were saying. These fellows were too engrossed in hitting his face, so they had unintentionally dropped their defenses around other places.
I have no choice but to give it a try.
Suffering another punch, Brennan gritted his teeth and kicked his foot upward. He happened to strike one of the assailants in the crotch, and the latter immediately fell to the ground.
I succeeded?
Seeing how he had managed to defeat one of them so easily, Brennan immediately felt a surge of confidence. His heart couldn't help but beat in exhilaration. It was true that those two were unreliable as allies, but their analysis of the battle was indeed spot on. While barely being able to defend against the onslaught of the remaining three cultivators using his gleam, he pricked up his ears and listened intently. At this point, the other two were still in the midst of their discussion.
So the four of them have been coordinating tightly with one another, and the cultivator whom Brennan just kicked happened to be their leader. His abrupt incapacitations introduced a moment of fluster among the group as they struggled to readjust their collaborative formation. If I were in his position, I'd use the Power Fist together with our clan's Flowing Water Conception to suppress the rest of them. Using the Power Fist together with the Flowing Water Conception is indeed a good idea. However, the key right now should be to take down that grey-robed man who's just taken over the role of maintaining the collaborative formation. As long as he's around, the formation will remain a threat. No matter how agile and flexible your movements are, it'll be hard for you to overwhelm the remaining three of them when they're still covering one another tightly. You're right. But how should we deal with that grey-robed man? Well, it's pretty simple. You can use the sunflower steps to back away before jabbing your finger for 3 inches to the left. The grey-robed man will then charge forward in response, and that'll present an opportunity to take him down. I should give it a try.
Brennan wasn't too inclined to believe that such a move would really lure the grey-robed man into dashing forward, but he didn't have many options. Thus, clenching his teeth tightly, he activated the sunflower steps and retreated 6 feet back, after which, using his finger as a sword, he jabbed forth with imposing momentum. Due to the nature of the collaborative formation, Brennan's retreat caused the trio sustaining the formation to be drawn in his direction. The grey-robed man maintaining the formation ended up being pulled over as well, causing him to come into the line of attack for the jab that Brennan had just launched. A burst of sword energy struck the gray-robed man's jade token. With a look of disbelief on his face, the gray-robed man was embraced by a brilliant burst of light as he vanished.
It worked!
Brennan was stunned. He had thought that those two were just prattling on about nonsensical theories, but who could have known that their suggestions would turn out to work in practice? Having gotten rid of two of his opponents so easily, his heart pounded wildly in excitement. Also, it was only around this moment that he realized that the discussions which had been spoken openly a moment ago had switched to gleam telepathy, which meant that his opponents were no longer able to hear those words. It seemed like it wasn't that the two of them didn't want to save him, but that they hoped for him to win this battle with his own strength. Just that there was still one last doubt. The two of them shouldn't have been too much stronger than him, so how were they able to come up with such ingenious attacks one after another? Even casual pointers from them actually allowed him to achieve victory so easily. Was it about how spectators had a clearer view of what was happening compared to those directly involved in a situation? Knowing that this was no time for him to be deep in thought, he continued to pay careful attention to what was being said. The other party's voices sounded.
Since their collaborative formation's been undone, should we focus the attack on one of them to take him down quickly before going for the other? Of course not. While the threat of the collaborative formation's been resolved, the fact that they're no longer in a decisive advantage anymore means that the last two remaining opponents will be far more wary of you. If you assault one of them, the other will make use of whatever opening you show to take you down. What you should do at this moment is stand your ground and focus on defense. Focus on defense?
It was because he thought that the words of those two made perfect sense that he had moved according to their instructions earlier. However, at that very moment, Brennan couldn't help but frown doubtfully. At this point, even without their collaborative formation, he still would be unable to cope with the assault of these two equally powerful opponents simultaneously. It hadn't been simple for him to take down the other two opponents, so he should make use of this momentum to take down the remaining two. If he became defensive at such a moment, it would only be a matter of time before his stamina was whittled down.
I don't have to necessarily do as they say. Those two fellas can't always be right anyway.
Recalling how those two refused to charge in to help him, choosing to stand by the side to watch the commotion instead, Brennan gritted his teeth in anger. With a cold harumph, he raised his palm and charged toward one of the opponents. Focusing all of his gleam into his palm strike, just as Brennan felt like he was going to finally overpower the opponent before him, his heart jolted fearfully as his eyes narrowed in shock. Unknowingly, a foot had appeared right in front of him. He was struck in his vitals, causing him to fly all the way back. The excruciating pain from the kick nearly caused him to black out.
You were right, Peregrine. He focused his offense on one person, and that allowed the other to grasp a hold of his weakness.
Art exclaimed in excitement upon seeing that the theory was indeed true.
Indeed, if he had chosen to go on the defensive, those two would have swiftly fallen into a state of fluster. After all, they just witnessed two of their comrades being wiped out in a moment of inattention, and they lost the safety of their collaborative formation. At such a time, they would surely be more anxious than ever to defeat him. If only he'd waited 3 more moves, the panic that they were feeling would have been magnified manyfold, causing them to make much riskier moves in hopes of ending the battle quickly. That would have created an ideal opportunity to strike. It's truly a huge pity,
Xavier said.
A battle is all about grasping timing and seeking opportunities. If there are no opportunities in sight, you just have to create one. Yes, you're right!
Art nodded vehemently in agreement.
Grasping timing and seeking opportunities.
Suppressing the excruciating pain that he was suffering from, Brennan forced himself to his feet and raised his guard once more. Seeing that Brennan had stood up once more, the two opponents flinched slightly in astonishment. Anxiety and fear could be seen reflected on their faces. With a ferocious roar, one of the opponents charged forward. His charge might have seemed reckless, but in truth he was trying to create an opportunity for his comrade. Understanding this logic, Brennan knew better than to move recklessly this time around. He immediately scrunched his body together and charged toward the second opponent. Meanwhile, the second opponent noticed the openings that the first opponent had exposed to Brennan, and he was intending to move in coordination to cover the first opponent. However, not expecting Brennan not to fall for the bait at all and go for him instead, the second opponent was rammed down in an instant, causing a stream of blood to gush down his nose. It worked! Seeing how everything had worked out well, tears of joy began streaming down Brennan's face. Those two unreliable bastards. They hadn't forsaken him yet. Seeing that Brennan had understood the intentions behind their conversation, Xavier nodded his head in approval. Since he had borrowed Peregrine's identity, he had to give something back to those in ancient Sage Ivo's lineage in compensation. Through the general pointers he offered them, and inculcating them in a habit of reflection, they would be able to continue improving themselves even after he left. After taking down the remaining two opponents and eliminating one of them, there was only one last person remaining. It didn't take long for Brennan to subdue him too. After crushing their jade tokens, he stomped up to Peregrine and Art, wanting to berate them for simply watching the commotion by the side. But, after a moment of hesitation, he chose instead to clasp his fist and bow slightly.
Thank you for your pointers earlier.
Xavier waved his hand calmly in response. It didn't matter to him whether the other party was grateful for his help or not. He was just doing what he thought was right. This was the man he was all along, principled, humble, and low profile.
Well, everything happened so quickly earlier. How did you see through all their flaws and come up with countermeasures with just a look?
Brennan asked doubtfully. His cultivation was around the same level as the other two of them, but why was he unable to see through anything at all, whereas the pointers given out by those two ended up becoming words of gold? It was as if they could peer right into the hearts of others.
Peregrine was the one who taught me this,
Art replied excitedly.
In a battle, one has to observe one's opponent carefully and determine their intentions in order to predict their movements.
After which, he moved on to throw out several other techniques. Hearing those words, Brennan was rendered completely mystified. He had never heard of those at all, and it was definitely not part of the lineage within their clan either. How did Peregrine know about all this?
Cultivation is not about blind diligence. It requires one to ruminate and evaluate and...
Seeing the doubt in Brennan's eyes, Xavier explained calmly. However, before he could finish his words, he suddenly turned his head to the side. There was a gust of wind, and following which 3 groups of people arrived from all around the forest. Each of the groups consisted of 4 people, and altogether there were 12 people in total. Coming from 3 different directions, they sealed off all routes of escape for Xavier and the other 2.
They are the ones. They've eliminated quite a few people along the way. If we don't partner together to get rid of them, it's only a matter of time before they destroy us too.
One of the team leaders harumphed coldly. This team leader was a tall and bulky individual. His voice was loud and deep, a little reminiscent of metal chains clanging against one another.
I guess we have to thank them for eliminating so many people for us then.
Another team leader spoke up with a smile. He turned to Xavier and said,
You should have curbed yourselves a little. I don't deny that you're all strong, but in battles like this, knowing when to lie low is of the utmost importance. Are you challenging us?
Before Brennan could make sense of the situation, Art had already stepped forward with a confident smile on his face.
Let's not waste any time then. All of you should come at us together.
Along the way, they had already eliminated at least 70 examinees by now. Most likely, their results had already sprinted all the way to the top. It was inevitable that they would catch the attention of other teams. After all, it was a common strategy for weaklings to band up together to get rid of the greatest threat in a competition. Given their spectacular accomplishments, it was just a matter of time before teams began to partner with one another in an attempt to eliminate them. If they were to succeed, their results would be moved over to them, allowing them to leap to the first place in a single shot.
Art!
Not expecting the other party to be so reckless as to provoke the other 3 teams, Brennan's face turned green from fright. That was 12 people before them. Against such a huge force, they would surely be crushed without the slightest sliver of a doubt. To provoke them further at a time like this was no different from courting death.
You want to fight us all together? Lad, you sure are arrogant, aren't you?
The bulky young man sneered coldly.
Since you are asking for it, don't blame us for not showing mercy then. Attack!
It was apparent that they had already negotiated with one another before coming over to confront them. As the bulky young man spoke, the 12 of them all slowly advanced forward, making sure to leave no gap for them to escape at all.
Peregrine?
Despite facing a numerical disadvantage, Art didn't seem nervous in the least. Instead, his eyes were gleaming brighter and brighter in excitement. He turned to look at Peregrine, only to see the latter nodding his head in affirmation. Thus, with a joyful war cry, Art dashed right into the crowd of enemies.
Art, don't be reckless!
Brennan felt as if his body had turned completely cold. That was 12 people in total, and none of their cultivation was any lower than Art's. To dash right in at this moment was as good as seeking death.
Peregrine, we need to devise a plan now to save Art and escape!
Panicked, Brennan turned to Xavier and urged anxiously.
Escape? There's no need for that. Just calm down and see what Art is capable of.
Xavier replied with a shake of his head. It was just a moment ago that he had corrected Art's state of mind. If he were to encourage the latter to flee at this moment, wouldn't all of that confidence that he'd built up be shattered in an instant? As a teacher, there was no way that he would allow such a thing to occur.
But we'll die at this rate!
Brennan didn't think that Peregrine would be as extreme as Art. Just as he was conflicted as to what he should do, he suddenly saw the bulky young man charging right past Art. With his fingers spread wide like a fan, he thrust his palm right toward Peregrine's head, seemingly wanting to end his life. Just based on his aura, the bulky young man felt no different from an ordinary Saint Level 9 cultivator. However, when he drove his strength to its limit, it turned out that he was actually a half-introspective convalescence realm expert.
It's over.
Brennan's face paled in fright. The reason why he was able to defeat the 4 men earlier was because their cultivation was beneath his. Even so, he was still badly pummeled in the end. However, with the frightening might of this bulky young man and many other experts watching menacingly from the surroundings, it seemed like they were really doomed this time around. With a wail of desolation, he began thinking about where he should have a drink to drown his sorrows after he was eliminated. On the other hand, a slight frown crept onto Peregrine's forehead, and instead of dodging, he raised his hand. Before the palm thrust of the bulky young man could land, Peregrine's slap had already struck the other party's face squarely. The slap seemed to be packed with plenty of power as the bulky young man spun 2 rounds before crashing onto the ground. The bulky young man was stunned for a moment before his daze warped into rage and he charged at Xavier once more. Another slap struck the other side of his face and he spun 2 more times around before crashing into the ground once more.
Small fries like you should scram to the side. Don't come here and cause trouble.
Xavier harumphed coldly.
I...
The bulky young man wanted to say something to at least salvage some of his reputation, but when he thought about the 2 slaps he had just suffered, his face immediately reddened again, and his words choked up in his throat. Was he really a small fry, unworthy of the other party even making a real move? He turned to look at Art, and saw that there were already 4 men collapsed on the ground. Even though Art's cultivation was beneath his, for some reason, his movements were exceptionally difficult to deal with. It was as if he was a wolf who had leaped into a pack of sheep. There was no one here who could withstand more than 3 blows from him.
All right, I'll go fight with him.
Without much hesitation, the bulky young man turned around and charged at Art instead. Brennan was shocked.
Can anyone tell me what's happening here? Why did Peregrine and Art become so weird in the hour that we parted from one another? Am I dreaming or something?
In the square located along the perimeter of the mountain, Sergio suddenly materialized in midair before falling heavily to the ground. He had just been teleported out of the mountain under the effects of a teleportation formation. He looked at the sky with a dazed look in his eyes, almost as if he was doubting his own existence. He was a genius blessed with great talents. He had to step over thousands of his peers in order to get to where he currently was. But after coming this far, even though he had collaborated with several others to gang up on someone weaker than him, he still ended up being eliminated so easily. The thought of others mocking him for this failure was more than enough to make his entire body cringe in sheer embarrassment. Struggling to his feet, he was just about to hide his face and leave silently when he heard a shocked voice exclaiming in the air, "Sergio, you've been eliminated too? I didn't think I'd see you here." Following which, a figure walked over. After catching a closer sight of the other party, Sergio was stunned for a moment before exclaiming as well,
Oberon, what are you doing here?
Oberon was a good friend of Sergio's. In terms of fighting prowess, they were a close match with one another, so they would frequently spar. It was incredibly humiliating for him to be eliminated so swiftly from the examination, but who could have thought that his good friend would end up being eliminated even quicker than he was?
Let's not talk about such depressing matters. I attacked someone weaker than me in hopes of raising my ranking, but who could have thought that the other party would end up sending me here?
Oberon shook his head bitterly.
You were also eliminated by someone weaker than you.
Sergio was stunned as a thought surfaced in his head.
May I know who that person is?
Oh, it's embarrassing to even talk about it. The other party is only at Saint Level 9 Pinnacle, a huge gap away from matching you and me.
Oberon's face reddened in shame.
He's also a Saint Level 9 Pinnacle cultivator. Who is it?
Sergio asked anxiously.
He's a descendant of ancient sage Ivo, Art.
Oberon replied awkwardly.
It really is him. I was eliminated by that fellow as well.
Sergio widened his eyes in disbelief.
Wait a moment. You were eliminated by Art too.
Oberon was stunned.
Indeed, he fought against all 12 of us alone and ended up eliminating all of us.
Sergio explained agitatedly. However, before he could finish his piece, another shocked exclamation sounded in the air.
You were eliminated by Art too? What a coincidence. We were eliminated by him as well. He single-handedly sent the 4 of us out of the examination.
Following which, 4 young women walked over.
It really is a huge coincidence. It's the exact same for us too.
2 young men and a young woman walked over.
Oh, wait, all of you were eliminated by Art? The same happened to us too. We were eliminated so tragically.
Yet another 5 more youths walked over.
Hey, you aren't the most tragic ones, alright? Did you see Ira and his group over there? It seems like they were eliminated by the descendants of ancient sage Ivo too.
A few more people walked over and joined in the conversation. Watching as a huge crowd of similar ill-fated individuals gathered around him, Sergio's lips twitched wildly. It was just an instant, but the name Art had already rallied more than 40 people. Shockingly, they were all eliminated by Art single-handedly. Was there some kind of mistake here? How could that fellow possibly not sustain any injuries or run out of gleam when he had fought with so many opponents already?
There's no need to feel down. Come, follow me.
A young man walked up to Sergio and consoled him. Recognizing the person standing before him to be an acquaintance, Julian, Sergio nodded slightly before following behind the young man. Julian brought Sergio out of the crowd to another group of eliminated young men and women and said,
It is a pleasure to meet all of you. We were eliminated by the descendants of ancient sage Ivo. May we know if...
what a coincidence. Yeah, we were eliminated by the descendants of ancient sage Ivo too.
Me too!
Wow, we're comrades all of the same plight. We should really get along well.
A commotion flared up, and it took only an instant for the group to expand to dozens of people. After which, Julian brought Sergio away to approach yet another group. But before they could begin speaking, the other party had already begun speaking.
You were eliminated by Art too, right? It's the same for us as well.
At this moment, Sergio really had no idea what to make of this peculiar situation.
Everyone, listen up! We wish to establish the Fellowship of Examinees eliminated by the descendants of ancient Sage Ivo. Is there anyone who wishes to join us?
A voice echoed across the square.
I wish to register. Ooh, me too.
The invitation was met with popular response, and voices of approval rippled across the crowd. It was in this instant that Sergio suddenly felt that it wasn't a humiliation that he was eliminated by the weaker Art. Instead, it felt like a symbol of honor, a mark of solidarity amongst him and the others.
That's all?
Brennan stared at the impassive Art as he felt as if his notion of what being powerful meant had just been refreshed. If he had been the one who had fought against those 12 opponents, it was likely that he wouldn't have even gotten a chance to flee. Yet Art, who was at the same cultivation realm as him, actually defeated all of them with ease. Just what in the world had the other party been through over the past hour for such a massive change to happen to him? On the other hand, paying no heed to Brennan's incredulity, Art walked up to Xavier and asked,
So, how did I do this time around?
His eyes reflected deep nervousness, reminiscent of a student facing his teacher after forgetting to complete his holiday assignment. How did you do? Xavier's eyes were filled with boredom as he waved his hands perfunctorily. You were so-so? He couldn't even bother to comment on Art's performance anymore. After all of the pointers he'd given and the battles that the other party had been through, this was all the other party could do? It was fortunate that he was adopting a persona at the moment, or else he really would have died from embarrassment. All of the disciples whom he, Xavier, had taught eventually became powerhouses who possessed extraordinary battle sense. However, the one standing before him was truly... It was just a moment ago that he thought that the descendants of the 100 schools of philosophers possessed superior intelligence, capable of comprehending and assimilating new knowledge swiftly. Yet it was as if Art's intelligence had turned against him. He was focusing too much on the trivialities that he was losing sight of what was important, causing his movements to lack spirit.
I was wrong. I know that I didn't do well in the earlier battle.
Sensing Xavier's disappointment, Art lowered his head and apologized with a trembling voice. His accomplishments so far were all built upon the other party's pointers. If the other party was no longer willing to teach him anymore, how was he going to climb to greater heights? At the same time, Brennan clutched his hair as this seemingly ridiculous scene unfolded before his eyes. He found himself unable to catch up with the thought process of the other two at all.
Could this even be called didn't do well?
Xavier snapped.
Fine, I guess I'll give you some leeway for your self-awareness. Earlier, for the third move that you executed after charging into the crowd, you could have used the coupled arm fist to eliminate that red-robed young man with the least amount of effort. Why did you switch to the startling front hand to attack the blue-robed young woman at the right instead? Do you know that you wasted 3 whole moves due to the choice that you made? Think of the time that you wasted with that. If they had recovered during that period of time, you would have been dead before you even knew it. Also, for the earlier kick, you could have dodged it in advance too. Why did you catch it instead? Are you trying to show off that you're capable of defending yourself, or are you trying to flaunt the resilience of your scrawny body?
As Xavier spoke, his fury seemed to build up more and more, such that he ended up pointing out 8 flaws in a single breath by the end. Furthermore, every single one of those flaws pointed out was spot on in its analysis.
I...
Art was rendered speechless by the questions. Everything had happened so quickly earlier, such that Art didn't think that Peregrine would have been able to remember every move and every flaw so clearly. He was initially proud that he had managed to eliminate 12 people at once, but those words jolted him back to reality. He knew that he still had a long way to go before reaching the top. There was no pride in just being able to defeat weaklings. Humility and a low profile. That was the way to go.
Art was so formidable in that battle, but Peregrine was still able to point out so many flaws in his movements. That eye of discernment is truly...
Brennan gulped down a mouthful of saliva. It was at that instant that he felt that he'd gotten a glimpse into the reason why Art was able to make such huge progress within a short hour. It turned out that everything was Peregrine's credit.
Peregrine, can you teach me as well? I wish to become as powerful as Art, too.
Unable to stand it any longer, Brennan walked up to Xavier and clasped his fist earnestly, putting down the pride that he had shown previously.